In the frozen silence of the intensive care unit, our story begins with a patient lying motionless under a mask of anesthesia while doctors fight for his life, struggling with threatening bleeding and falling blood pressure. The tension in the air builds as the doctors, starting to get nervous, urgently ask the assistants to bring in a blood bag and a clamp to stop the relentless bleeding. All eyes are on the monitor, the fate monitor, where the patient's pulse is dropping ever lower than normal, every heartbeat a battle for life, as the situation is very critical indeed. One of the surgeons said that it seems that the iron object they removed earlier caused a very strong infection, which made the surgeon very surprised and nervous, as he could not understand how this is possible. In a race against time, where every second is precious, the doctors realize that any delay could cost the patient's life, so they decide that it is necessary to resuscitate the heart and lungs right away. The grim readings of the equipment cast a shadow of hope, foreshadowing that the patient is already teetering on the brink between life and death. At this critical moment, a heavy-hearted assistant informs the doctor that the patient's heart has stopped beating, adding another unsettling note to an already tense environment. He tried to contain his emotions, but he failed, saying that the patient was no longer alive. The doctor's heart sinks at the memory of the words of the patient's mother who, on the eve of the operation, anxiously asked him if her son would be okay, leaving him wondering how she could announce such sad news. He recalls how she, choking back tears, begged him to save her son, telling him how much he had endured because of her mistakes, words that are deeply seared into his soul. His thoughts return to the mother's words that her son is the only thing she lives for on this earth, her only joy and meaning in life, giving it a special significance. The doctor's gaze once again slides over the face of the patient lying in helpless sleep under anesthesia, who is no longer breathing, causing the doctor to feel a deep sense of loss. He revisits the mother's words over and over in his thoughts, as if trying to find an answer, and with a heavy heart he closes his eyes, sighing deeply at the helplessness and bitterness of what is happening. There is a sudden silence in the surgical ward as everyone puts their hands down, gazing mournfully at the patient, paying their respects with a moment of silence, while the medical records record the time of his passing and the tragic cause, an infection that led to brain death due to profuse bleeding. The unconscious patient lay in the intensive care unit, where his life hung in the balance and the anesthesia tube seemed unnecessary because his condition was critical. In the waiting room, his mother sat with her fingers crossed, praying hopefully for a successful outcome to the surgery, her every breath reflecting hope and fear. She continued to cry, feeling powerless in the face of the unknown, and the only thing left to her was to hope for a positive outcome that could change everything. Tension reached a climax when the doors of the operating room opened and one of the doctors stepped out, causing a wave of anxiety among those waiting. This surprised everyone else very much, because the operation is not over yet, so it was arrogance. Therefore, the chief surgeon ordered everyone to quickly return to their seats, as well as prepare a log book and the patient's vital signs. The doctor immediately ordered the blood transfusion to be speeded up as well, and also said to check the metal object removed from the patient's body, and also, since there were enough necessary instruments on the table, the doctor decided to suggest another test for tetanus. The doctor also took off his mask, which is strictly forbidden to do in operating rooms, but the thought began to visit him that they really still have an excellent chance to save the patient. At that moment, all surgeons were surprised, because is there any point in operating on an already dead patient? But the doctor was resolute, and said that now everything is really different, probably the rumors about this doctor have not yet reached him. He was special, because he always took on the most difficult tasks, and saved the lives of those people who could not be returned, although he went all the time without a mask. No one even guessed until recently about his abilities. But when he arrived, the operation resumed again, because he is the one who can even pull out the dead from the next world, and all this in the literal sense of the word. His name was Shinyu-sun. He is also better known by the nickname God Hands, so he also decided not to waste time, and wearing his mask, he proceeded to the operation. Really, some magical processes began on the cardiogram and the heartbeat gradually began to recover, which was really hard to believe. After a few hours of work, after all, the operation was a success, and in the operating room everyone began to scream and rejoice together, because it was really an excellent job, after which the patient was saved. And after a hard day, you really need to relax somehow, so the doctor took a can of drink and opened it. He decided to relax a little and have a drink, as he was really tired after the operation, and he also realized that he would spend his entire vacation in the hospital again. When he came out of it and looked at the excellent view of the city, he realized that he really had not had a normal rest for a very long time. Again today he spent the whole day in the operating room, despite the fact that he had a day off. He looked at the sky and did not understand why life is so cruel. At that moment, a big announcement also appeared, which tells us that these are indeed the hands of a god. It was already dark, but his nickname was given for a reason, but all because he can save even dead people. As he himself reports, at first he even liked it, and his main motivation was the joy that formed after saving the dying, as this is really a talent, to pull people out of the other world. However, he lay in his bed and was really in pain, all due to the fact that he did not have time to rest at all, after various rumors that spread throughout the city. Now every time he is entrusted with the treatment of really very important and wealthy patients whose lives must be saved. It is mistaken for portable medical devices that can be used at any time. But he understood that he would not last so long, so something was needed in life. He looked with his tired eyes at his hands and he was really interested in understanding what the title of the Hand of God, which he was presented with, means. It's really not easy, because of this, all the doctors began to be afraid of him and avoid him, so now it has become more like a mockery. He took a deep breath and really decided to think about when was the last time he rested and did not work under supervision and pressure. Choosing the next can of soda, he understood that at least he would earn a lot of money, but he didn't have time to even spend it. He smiled and looked at the bottom, realizing that perhaps you are some moment of your life. He still turned the wrong way, so as soon as he returns home, he will drink another can of beer and relax a bit. Suddenly, a bus drove sharply at him at great speed, which the guy obviously did not see while he was moving straight in his direction. The headlights began to dazzle his glasses and, as he himself liked to say, when a person dies, his whole life flashes before his eyes. This is exactly what happened to our hero. He really began to remember all his most interesting and intimate moments. But basically, everything that he had in his thoughts, as well as his whole practical life, was spent in the operating room. He even himself really became very interested. Why does he see only memories from the operating room? But there was already critically little time for reflection, and his bag flew into the air right from his hands. And almost immediately a white bright flash appeared, which informed the whole world that the brilliant surgeon was no longer alive. Meanwhile, the weather was really very good outside. Everything was happening in the ancient city, the building of which was very similar to a castle. Out of the leaves, someone started screaming and calling out to a guy named Ray. It was the name of our surgeon, who still could not understand whose voice it was. The girl noticed that he seemed to be trying to open his eyes now. But didn't he die? The surgeon looked at his hands, which really rejuvenated a lot, and was very surprised by this, because he did not understand what was wrong with them. At that moment, his new family approached him, who noticed that the guy had already woken up. They were very happy about this. Ray was really very surprised, and it seems he began to understand what had just happened. The family continued to rejoice and hug their child, rejoicing in every moment, because how can a child be so sweet when awake? In addition, his new father reported that the guy really looks very much like his mother, which is why he is so cute. She continued to hug her son and was really very happy, but the guy himself really didn't like it, because he absolutely could not understand what was happening to him now. But the only question that tormented him, at that moment, while the new environment looked at him, was why is he still alive? And while he was trying to figure out who all these people who were starting to squeeze him were, the girl made a remark to the guy, saying that he should do everything much more gently, as it could hurt the child. The surgeon did not understand what kind of small body he had, why everyone wants to squeeze it very hard. Was he really reborn as the child of these two? And after analyzing the situation, he realized that then these people look like his parents, but what kind of clothes are they wearing? Are they cosplayers? The girl took her child in her arms and began to apologize to him for the fact that dad hurt him a little with his beard, from which the child had a small cut. They looked at his hand and were very frightened, just like the child who noticed that his hand was injured. Panic very much after he learned that Ray had hurt himself. He offered to call a priest to heal him. It was really obvious that he was panicking and had never had any experience with a child. But the girl reassured him and said that it was just a scratch, and there was nothing wrong with that. She put it on the surface and said that she herself could cure him without problems, which surprised the child very much. I wonder how she is trying to cure him, most importantly from what? He looked at her eyes and at the surface and said that she herself could cure him without any problems, which surprised the child very much. I wonder how she is trying to cure him, most importantly from what? He looked into her eyes and began to study even more superficially. Is she really a doctor too? And then he realized that in fact the ointment can leave a scar, but he did not know how I could tell about it. But the girl used her magic and, without touching the child at all, created a magical power that began to heal his hand. He was very surprised, because she immediately healed, which he had never seen before, for all the time of his work as a surgeon. At this moment, he once again analyzed his hand and looked at it, and realized that this is not medicine, so it means magic. And his mother began to laugh and said that the operation was over, and the wound really didn't seem to exist. The guy looked at his hand and was very happy, just like his parents, because not a single trace of the wound was visible at all. The girl began to laugh, and said that she had said that she could handle it herself. Thanks to this, her father exhaled heavily with relief and said that she had not yet lost her magical abilities. And the surgeon, having heard that the word magic had just sounded, concluded that it looks like now he is a completely different person, and has he really been reborn in another world? Well, in the meantime, it was already getting dark outside and the whole family began their preparation for bed. Parents decided to put a small child to bed, but he could not sleep for a very long time, as he thought about his new business and the meaning of life. He woke up a few hours later and was very alert, and also noticed the fact that he hadn't slept in such a long time. 3 months have passed since he was reborn in this world, and during this time he understood a lot from their conversations. This world is really completely different from the world in which the surgeon lived before, as if it were a fantasy world. This is where the lives of monsters and people begin at the same time, as well as other creatures that fight with each other. Because of this, people can be attacked at any time by monsters and various orcs. The villagers also say that they have to develop their strength and dedicate themselves to their chosen profession from a young age. Meanwhile, my mother approached Ray and decided to cure him. Another feature of this world, magic, which is developed here instead of science. Whenever Sane heals a child's wounds, he always resorts to magic, not medicine, as was the case before in his world. It really was a very amazing life that the surgeon really deserved. He managed to realize that everything where he is now is not a dream, but really a new reality, but for some reason, the memories and knowledge of his past life are also well preserved. He continued to sit in bed and look at the moon, because never before had he even thought that he was so lazy and likes to sleep. Come to think of it, in his past life he didn't even have a normal time for simple sleep. If he hadn't died in an accident then, he probably would have died from overwork, because the work of a surgeon is really a very difficult thing. And now, having been reborn, he can absolutely not think about it and rest exactly as much as he needs. When else will he have the chance to sit back and do nothing so much? Well, in the meantime, the night was coming to an end and there was a very beautiful pot with an unusual plant on the windowsill. It seems that he was also covered with magic, because he constantly attracted something to himself, and it was very strange. But in the meantime, white pimples scattered throughout the room, and while the guy was sleeping, everyone also continued to fly in the direction of that same magical plant. And he absolutely could not understand what it was like a thin thread that pierced his body. There was such a light feeling that this is something incredible, because after 10 minutes of such a dream, the guy already felt very cheerful. Maybe this is the same mana that his parents were talking about. Having tried to manage it, the surgeon realized that it was really very difficult. And every time he tried to make her move, she just flew around. At this point, the guy still tried to focus on where the flow of mana begins and ends, since it really is no different from blood. If you imagine that it flows through his veins, then you can immediately feel how it will begin to fully fill his body. It was truly an infinite energy that was truly an art to master, but you really need to do this very, very slowly, trying to feel every breath and every movement of the body, like a leaf that floats on water, or as if you are in a winter region, watching snowflakes fly in the wind. And it's really very difficult, but only through this diligent process, the first magical flame can appear from the hand. And finally, he succeeded. After such long years of training, he was able to prove to himself and for the first time created fire from his hand. He was very proud of himself, because he really could do it. He even began to cry, because at last he was able to use fire magic and he managed to direct mana in the right direction. It took him 3 whole years of hard work to do this. Somehow he managed to direct the flow of mana and remember the whole process. Remember absolutely everything that he read in books late at night. The only thing he didn't understand was the mana management manual. So far it was really very difficult for him. The method that was described in the book is the principle of accumulation of mother in the body and its rational use, and if it is replenished from the outside, then why should he accumulate it in the body? In addition, accumulating mana within yourself and then using it has some limitations, because no matter how you look at it, this is not an inefficient way to use it. The guy continued to read books to study this issue, and now he became interested. What if he prefers to use it freely, not trying to restrain it? After all, it is really much better to restore mana from the outside and immediately spend it. Thus, the need for mana circles will disappear. And he was able to come to this conclusion completely on his own, in his youth. But it is also the most dangerous method that is not described in any book, but it is definitely worth it. Even if the guy said that, he didn't even know if he would succeed. He thought he would have to do some more research on the subject. His parents were really surprised how a child can read so many books in his free time, but they were also very happy for him. It's really wonderful to see. They were very proud of him, because their main task was to raise a very good person out of him, as well as an equally strong magician. His father was very surprised, because with such a physique, a guy can definitely become a good swordsman. But his wife got ahead of him, because in this case, their baby Ray will turn into the same mountain of muscles, like his father himself. He got a little angry about this, but at least said that he was handsome. Well, the guy continued to read books in his spare time and study all the information about this Manu. But he still couldn't understand why the parents were hiding if they were still talking so loudly. Anyway, the mother began to suspect a little something was wrong, so she turned to her husband and asked, "Does it not seem strange to you that he only does what he reads?" But this question confused him a little. What does she already mean? They looked at the guy again and said that ordinary children of his age want to play and walk on the street, but it seems to him that he is only interested in books. Well, he did not see any problem in this, and said that the mother should not worry. Isn't it good that he likes to study? In addition, she herself said that she wants to grow an excellent magician out of him. The girl looked at him and really agreed with this, although she did not say anything. But the guy heard all this and realized that he was still very far from this calling, so he needed to study very, very much. He continued to absorb one book after another, because he needed to finally learn how to restore his mana, moreover, to perfection. Another night passed in the process of studying books and the long-awaited morning came. His mother entered the room with a smile and greeted her child. But suddenly he continued to sit in the study of the book, and told his mother that he woke up a long time ago and continues to read, which she really started to cry and get a little nervous. Of course, reading books and learning is great, but in any case, he should frolic enough before he grows up. At that moment, the mother looked at her child once again and began to think that perhaps she really devotes little time to him. And then tears began to flow from her thoughts, because she had really been crying a lot lately. She walked up to her boyfriend and sat down across from him, asking if he wanted to play with his mom today. But this question turned out to be really much more difficult than one could imagine, so he surprised the guy. His eyes lit up. Was she really going to teach him magic? He was very happy with this offer, because she wants to educate her child through children's games. So he shouted and got up from his seat, said that he really wanted this very much, and dreamed of going to play with her. But the mother herself saw something wrong and it alarmed her very much. She ran up and hugged her son very tightly, realizing that he was very happy, which means that he had been waiting for this opportunity for a very long time. Well, the guy at that moment just endured all these hugs. He looked at his mother and just could not understand what she wants to do now. They went for a walk with her and it was not at all what he expected. He told her that there were no books here, so why did they come here? But Mom told him to put all the books aside today, so they will go outside and play better there. But Ray had completely different plans for today, saying that he would better go and do more and thank for this opportunity. He didn't understand what was going on now. Why should he waste time playing games instead of practicing? The mother was very happy, because how can their baby say such beautiful words? Indeed, it is simply a delight to the ears of the mother of every child. She suggested that at least today he should go and unwind a little, but the guy was very surprised by this, because he didn't go out all the time, and also didn't plan to do it at all. But the mother insisted and asked only once to have fun with her on the street. And he hadn't really gone out since he was reborn. All his time was spent in the library and learning new skills. He didn't even know what the outside world looked like, so he smiled and immediately agreed, but just for once. That's great, then move forward right now. And when they had already left, the guy constantly looked around, because he could not believe that now this is his new reality, and the world in which he is now completely different from the one that was before. And yes, it's true, it was a very small beautiful town, with a cozy atmosphere, which was really a pleasure to be in. He looked at the very water in which the leaves floated and noticed the fact that for the last 3 years he only did yours, that he read books sitting at home. He looked at the beautiful windmills and fired, and also said that he could not even think about going outside and was like a beast that was locked in a cage. And all these thoughts began to press a little on his small young head, which really made him think about the current state. At that moment, his mother smiled and looked in his direction. It was clear that he was thinking about something very much, so she asked if everything was all right with him. But the guy did not know how to react correctly, and what to answer, so his mother suggested that he just look and run around this territory. They immediately began to do this, because there was no reason to worry or think about the difficult philosophical life. The guy was very happy, because after a past life as a surgeon, he finally had free time, as well as the opportunity to be a little happy, also to be a child. That is why he tried to live each of these moments in a special way, and also I absolutely did not distract them with what difficult adult tasks. At that moment, he really felt like a real child, which he actually was, but this time, it was really possible to worry about absolutely nothing. He was very happy and really couldn't believe that now this was his new reality. The sky was simply beautiful, as if it had been created at all for this moment and this work. In addition, the guy came with his mother to the top of the rock, from which there was a really beautiful view of the lake and the fir trees that grew near it. Indeed, this surprised the guys very much, because for the long years that he spent in the operating room, He never had time to see such beautiful edges and views and moments, so for him it was just surprise and pleasure. Before he was reborn, he didn't even have time to stop, he kept running and running all the time. He lived for the sake of others, and therefore he was sick of himself, because he simply had to survive. All of this paralleled the fact that he was the chief surgeon who saved every life except his own. He continued to look at this beautiful view and was finally happy, because he had never felt so free before, and expressed great gratitude for the fact that he was lucky to be reborn in this world. He smiled and immediately decided to share this moment with his mother, so he turned to her. He turned and looked at her with his sweet childlike smile. After that, together they began to look at the sky, and the guy himself began to thank her for having opened this world to him. But the thoughts of the old work still could not leave him, because he constantly remembered how he worried about each patient and sent him to the operating room. It was in life where he was constantly busy with patients and performed various examinations and operations. He recalled how an assistant approached him and reported that the next operation would be in 5 minutes, at that moment when he was just sitting in his office and leaning against the wall, begging at least someone to save him from overwork. And he remembers it as a terrible dream, since it could not continue like this anymore, it was really his limit. At that moment, black and white dots and flashes began to appear in front of him. These were very scary memories that made him panic and worry very much about this situation. He screamed in panic that it was cardiac fibrillation, at that moment when his mother tried to hug the guy and calm him down. She smiled and asked if he was just having a nightmare. But it was just a dream. He really did have a very good time with his mom, but why did he have such a terrible dream? He opened his eyes and looked away and wept a little. Meanwhile, the weather was still really great outside, and the city continued to live its own life, although there weren't many people there now. He remembered that he was reborn in this world, therefore those very dreams visited him, so the old life decided to remind himself. But the guy looked at the next building, saying that this time he lives this life completely different from the past. And so far, everything was very much like paradise, the people were friendly, and the trees and bushes continued to grow, delighting everyone around every day. It was time to return home, so my mother happily informed my father about this, saying that they had already arrived. At that moment he cleaned the room a little, also very happy about such a walk, and said that he had something. He jerked his mother's dress sharply, trying to get her attention. He looked at her with his cute and childish eyes, asking her to do a small favor for him, namely to teach him magic. From such a proposal, his mother was very surprised and frightened, because she did not expect that it would happen so quickly. So she asked her husband, "How can he be so cute?" and fell on him from happiness. She was very pleased with such an offer, so she asked the child if he was already impatient to learn magic. But since he wants so badly, she will gladly teach him. He was very happy with this answer and continued to smile, as he never seems to be able to get used to such a reaction. But my mother was ready for this, so she asked why he wants to start training. But the guy answered in the affirmative that he wanted to study the element of fire, so the mother immediately activated the fire and showed it to her child. He was really very happy, because he understood that his mother was really a real professional in her field, but he did not show any special emotions. She was a little frightened and surprised by such a reaction, because how could this be? She just got fire. Isn't it amazing why the guy made absolutely no reaction? So mom started waving her fingers, asking if the magic was too weak, but the guy just said that he had already used such magic so many times, so you definitely shouldn't be offended by this. To begin with, the mother invited the guy to sit down. "We are looking for," of course, he immediately agreed. She looked at him and decided to let him know that magic is really not that simple. It is the magic that they are using now that must first be transformed into Mando. And when you use a spell, for example, fire, then the magic quickly comes into action and everything works out. The guy looked at her with surprised eyes and was very happy, because at last they began to teach him magic. But he still had another question that haunted him. He asked his mother if there is any other way to transform Manu. This made her think a little, and so she asked the guy to explain a little what he means. She wanted to know if, for example, it was possible to transform fire or something like it. Mom explained to him that first he must spend mana, and then you restore it. All this happens due to the force of friction, as a result of which the same fire is formed. The guy waved his hands and said that there is a much easier way to convert mana just once, instead of 3, right? But in this case, the mana reserves will quickly run out. The girl was very surprised by such a question, and also did not understand why he began to ask such difficult questions. She quickly thought and said that everything is already possible, there is some sense in this. She smiled and said that if all these 3 actions can be stabilized into one, then it is quite possible to realize everything. Anyway, at least in theory. At that moment, in their large 3-story house, everything was also going on for a long and amazing atmosphere, during which the guy received new knowledge. He put his finger to his lips and began to think about what stabilization really means. It turns out that in its final form it will be possible to improve the properties. He looked at his hand, which, after another magic, began to extract his fire. And this surprised him very much, and also made his mother think several times more, because the flame that formed from his hand was very frightened and surprised her, especially since all this happened in their house. But the guy did not think about what happened in the house. He was pleased with the thought that at last everything worked out for him. At that moment, the flame woke up the father, who immediately approached them and decided to clarify what was happening here. Why did the fire appear in the house? Mom also panicked a little and didn't even know what to say. She looked at the guy and said that he was able to use magic himself. She didn't even understand how it happened at all. When using magic, a mana flow inevitably occurs, which made her think very hard. To be honest, she still feels really bad about the process, but shouldn't he feel the same way too? But this experiment did set their room a little on fire. The guy sat and continued to analyze this situation, because it is easier for him to figure it out if you imagine that this is an atom. And to interact with mana, you will not need to keep it inside. To him, and he continued to sit and think about this topic, but the fact that he was still a child did not leave her alone. She looked at him and I was very excited and scared, but the guy smiled and only said that he seemed to have gone too far. He looked at his mother and tried to somehow smooth this situation with his pretty little eyes, asking what happened to her now. But she also did not know what to say, because just a child can already use magic himself, for which she is very proud of him. The guy also smiled and was embarrassed and asked if she really thinks so. He seems to be a genius. But the mother also continued to praise him and be happy for him, because their son is really very cool. Meanwhile, at night of the same day, some strange things began to happen. This has already become a problem for a guy who woke up in the middle of the night from some strange sounds. It was his father and mother who began to sit at the table and discuss what they would do if suddenly the guy was called to the academy at such a young age. So they decided to do everything in my power to prevent this from happening. The guy woke up so abruptly, and could not understand really now everything that was happening. Was it they who were discussing it? But after all, my mother also understood that it was not so easy to do this. She claimed that her son is really a genius who is born once in 100, no, in 1,000 years. If, after all, he will attract the attention of the academy, then what will they still need to do? They still tried to find an answer to this question. Ray also had no idea what academy they were talking about, but also understood that it seemed like he might be forcibly taken there because of his abilities. That's why he ate his hand into a fist and said to prevent it, he needs to become even stronger, before he tried to learn magic for fun. But from that moment everything has changed. Now he is determined to study it further, because the absolute power over magic is quite comprehensible to him. In the meantime, the weather was really very beautiful outside. Birds were sitting in the trees. Some silhouettes were visible in the window. It seems that there really was someone there. There was some kind of menu, as well as a book and a candle, which had already been burning since the morning. Ray woke up and stretched, as he practically didn't sleep last night as he studied magic. He looked out the window and was very surprised that it was already morning outside and another sleepless and interesting night had flown by. He did not leave his room all the time, so he did not even notice how time flies. It is really very strange, because he spent all his time studying magic. Then, should he still go outside and start to explore this world, because he is already 15 years old, 10 of which he is constantly learning and improving his skills in magic. Mana research experiments gradually increased Ray's skill levels. And his ingenious understanding of how mana actually works went to a completely different level. He could sit quietly in his room and meditate, creating holograms of magic around him. This became the basis of his rapid development, which is why he himself began to study books from an early age so as not to waste his time. Due to the fact that he absorbed a large amount of mana, his hair became really pure white. He did not know if his knowledge of medicine would be useful, but he was sure that this component should be taken in the same way for study. He understood that in any case it was worth trying it, and he wrote on the tablet that he was ready to heal sick people. He was really very shocked, because his new reality still began to connect him a little with his previous life, where he also remembered that before the exit, which he had the last time, there was a lot of fire and absolutely everything changed beyond recognition. At that moment, there was both wind and ice, as well as a lot of really amazing magical things. Due to the fact that the guy constantly studied magic, he was able to synchronize all the elements from his finger, and also began to control them very confidently. And all this at the age of 15, while all his peers still continued to play games on the street. He smiled and clutched his head, because he realized that this is the ideal future that he built for himself, because very soon he will be able to become one of the most powerful and successful magicians in history, just like he did before in surgery. The weather was really very beautiful outside. The sun had just come out and began to illuminate all the roads that were here. Suddenly, he began to move the wooden stick very hard, emitting not very pleasant squeaks. But there was nowhere to go, since it was part of his plan. He stood right in the center of the city with a sign in which he promised to heal all sick people. He began to cough, because he realized that it was really a little embarrassing, but there was nothing wrong with that, since he was completely confident in his abilities. He remembers that in his previous life he was a brilliant surgeon, so now he decided to also use his favorite skills to help people, just like in his past life. He began to shout that he could cure absolutely any person, so he asked to bring him as many patients as possible. His parents rejoiced, because at last their child began to do what he loved and enjoyed it. But not everyone was happy to see the young guy, as the inhabitants of the city very quickly approached him and began to ridicule the novice magician, saying that he had better go home and play doctor there. They began to mock and say that he really is the same sick person. Ray didn't like it very much. He didn't think that people would treat him like that, because what do they even know about him? Of course, he did not expect this, so he grabbed his head and smiled, because he understood that in order for people to begin to appreciate him, it takes quite a bit of time. Someone to approach him, but it was already getting dark outside. He fell to his knees and threw his sign. He was very upset because no one came up to him. He had already begun to get ready, because he realized that today he would definitely not be able to do anything. That is why you need to return home. But suddenly a girl appeared in front of him, which surprised him a little. The guy looked up at her and barely held back his tears, but the girl really came with an interesting offer, or rather, she wanted to ask, can a guy really heal a sick person? The girl was very much surprised, but no less than Ray. She was very interested in whether he could really heal any particular patient. The guy liked this idea, because now his first patient appeared in front of him. He began to raise his hands and really rejoice, like a little child, which is what he was. But the girl just looked at him again and asked if he really could do it or not. But Ray first needs to familiarize himself with his condition before answering such questions. The girl looked at him and also burst into tears a little. It was noticeable that she was really unhappy. She got very angry and began to insult the guy, because how can such a small child like him heal a sick person? Therefore, she began to insult him and leave. He was really very surprised by such an expression in his direction, so he simply smiled, absolutely expecting such a standard and banal reaction. He looked at the leaving girl and began to address her, which she certainly could not expect. Ray was very serious and said that maybe he looked like a 15-year-old boy, but there is not a single patient in this world whom he cannot cure. He was very self-confident, so he ordered the girl not to judge him by his young face. The girl was very surprised that the guy said such smart things. She could not understand why he was so angry, because he really is still a child. Once again she looked at him and did not know why, but she had great trust and respect for him, because she felt a strong doctor in him. So she turned around and apologized, admitting that she really was wrong. Whereupon she asked him for permission to introduce herself. She was the only daughter of Viscount Gate, a girl named Gate Von Elisa. She looked at the guy and said that she was not his little girl. He was also a little surprised by this, but he also introduced himself and said that his name was Ray. But the question did not leave him. If the girl is from a rich family, then what about her clothes? She was very surprised by such a manner of communication, because why did he begin to talk to her so respectfully? So she asked him to speak the way he used to. The patient she was talking about was her father and urgently needed help. She began to tell that it started quite recently. His skin on his chest turned red and some strange bumps appeared. Everything was very swollen, and became the size of a balloon. The guy offered his finger to his chin, and began to analyze the situation. It became worse for a malignant tumor. But in any case, he must first look at and analyze the patient. And if he is right, then every minute counts now. He was very upset, because if this is a malignant tumor the size of a balloon, then you really need to hurry up, because it would not be too late. The girl and the guy began to move quickly to the appointed place. And now, after a few minutes, they had already arrived, so the girl suggested that they go there as soon as possible. And the guy at that moment looked at their house, and was very surprised, but then he realized that the girl was from a rich family. Immediately at the entrance, first meet the butler, who is joyful and first welcome. The girl ran up to him and began to grab him by the jacket, asking how his father felt. But he had really bad news. He said that his condition had become very bad, and he died suddenly. This frightened her very much and made her cry, because she could not believe it. Immediately after that, she began to run, and the butler tried to stop her. The child could not believe that this really happened, because this could not be. She ran into the room screaming and started screaming, trying to talk to her father. But at that moment her mother was already there, who was sitting and also crying, after which she looked at her daughter. She also decided to move closer to her father, whose tumor was already very large indeed, but she still hoped that he would be fine. Ray decided not to stand aside and approached the girl, asked her permission to examine her father. He began to analyze the current situation and saw there really 3 very large tumors that had been in the patient's body for a long time. Looking at them closer, he realized that they really sucked a lot of energy from his body. Putting his hand to his body, he still faintly, but still felt his father's heartbeat. Therefore, he concluded that he is still alive, so there is still a possibility to save him. From this, everyone was very shocked, including the butler, his mother and daughter. And the daughter began to grab his clothes, begging to save their father. Tears really began to flow in her eyes. She is not ready to believe it. And Ray himself only analyzed what was happening and realized that this was really his chance to prove what he was capable of. He looked at them and smiled, making it clear that he could handle it and there was absolutely no reason to worry. While he continued to examine his patient, along with his daughter, misunderstanding began to reign in the room, because all the people were really very shocked, because they did not know who this child was. But the butler said that Ray came with the girl. No one could believe that she had so thoughtlessly let some simple person into the house. One of them started screaming because he was very surprised by the fact that this guy was going to resurrect the dead Viscount. Is he some sort of swindler? Asked to come here and now plans to steal their jewelry. But his wife continued to cry, because she did not understand what is now the meaning of my words. She looked at the guy, and realized that she needed to cling to every opportunity now, so she only had to believe that this boy could work a miracle. The tumors were really very big, everything turned so black and the body began to rot. The guy activated his magic and realized that he needed to concentrate all the flow of mana on the tip of his finger and thus create a scalpel. At that moment, everyone was shocked and started screaming in fear as they had never seen anything like this before. They prevented the guy from working, constantly asking what is he trying to do right now. But he did not listen to them and simply closed his ears. But he really didn't like it very much, so he decided to explain everything by saying, "I'm trying to fix everything, isn't it obvious?" But still no one wanted to believe him. He was already so tired of it that he just exhaled and said, if they don't believe him, then he can just leave, if of course they don't mind. His wife started screaming at the security guard. She seemed to be very agitated and aggressive as well. She looked at him, then ordered him to try to believe this young boy, let him do his job. After the order was given, the young guy told everyone to leave the room, and with their cry they interfere with work. The guard, of course, clenched his hand into a fist, and thought to himself that this child is really very cheeky. Ray decided to act, and noticed that after he pierced the tumor, only pus came out instead of blood. He looked at her again and realized that it was not just a tumor, but something special. Having studied it more closely, he realized that it was formed under the influence of poison. It seems that someone wanted to poison the king a long time ago. Therefore, he continued to stand near the king and tried to help him by forming a huge magic circle around himself with the help of mana. It's time for a full-fledged operation, so he got ready and began to straighten his elbows. After he prepared for the operation, he still has great skills from a past life. He immediately formed a scalpel from his finger, as well as other necessary tools, and was ready to start the process. First of all, he needs to remove those parts that have already festered so that the infection is not transmitted to healthy organs. The whole family watched this process, and they were also really a little embarrassed by the fact that this was all done by a little 15-year-old genius. He also needed to make an incision in his right side on the side of his chest. After he did this, he grimaced a little at what he saw, since the picture was not the most pleasant. And it happened as he expected. Even the lungs were affected, which means that the disease has been progressing for a long time. He was very interested to know why no one had considered him before. But fortunately, now he will be able to fully engage in his treatment, which he is doing right now. The rotted part of the lungs is not that big, so it can be easily restored. Immediately after that, truly magical things began to happen on the operating table. Ray decided to create a surgical thread using mana, after which he planned to use it and sew up the body. All his skills, which he had been honing for 10 years in the library, were very useful to him right now, because he continued to work a miracle in front of the whole family. They were all as shocked as possible, but no one was screaming or resisting his actions. Everyone was just watching. Suddenly, another maid came up, who said that the boy brought by the young mistress was really very smart. Also, the butler complimented him, because he also did not expect him to be so cool. But the guy was as focused and serious as possible, despite the fact that he already had charisma, which is not inherent in his age, just like skillful hand movements. He was truly a genius who is born once every 1,000 years. He continued to sew up his patient as if he were in the operating room in a past life. He only had one last stitch left to do. Everyone watched him and concluded that he was like a puppeteer who was pulling the strings. No one could say anything bad about him, because everyone was shocked that he really was such a cool specialist. Almost no one had any doubts that Ray could really work a miracle and save their patient. The maid who literally just arrived was also shocked by this, because she had never seen anything like this in her life. Therefore, together they looked at the guy again, and both agreed with this. The operation was not easy, so the guy was sweating a little, and decided to wipe his forehead, as he was almost finishing the operation. He has already done all the main points, and also sewed up all the wounds of the patient. Only the simplest task remains, just to start the heart so that it works. He began to give him artificial heart massage, and in addition, he decided to create an automatic external defibrillator, which is intended to restore the normal functioning of the heart, all with the help of his magic. And after he himself created a defibrillator, he began to massage the heart, stimulating its work, and after just a minute of time, the patient's heart began to beat again. It began to be covered with blood. Everything was so cool done, as in a previous life. The guy received unexpected positive emotions, because for the first time he managed to save the patient in this life. He turned to the patient's family and then informed them that the operation was indeed a success. Everyone was shocked, including the guard who disliked this guy so much. But Ray was no less surprised, because he did not understand why they had such a reaction. Looking at the patient again, he saw that blood was coming from his mouth, so everything became clear to him. Due to the fact that the blood in the dead body suddenly began to circulate, there was a strong bleeding, which must be corrected now. Here the guard really could not stand it a little, and could hardly restrain his emotions. But it did not last long, after which he immediately began to poke his fingers at the guy and scream, accusing him of being a scammer, which he was sure of from the very beginning. But Ray did smile, and he felt a little embarrassed as he tried to explain to everyone what just happened. But the guard absolutely did not believe him, and tried to convince everyone else of this, since the patient still continued to lie dead. The guard was very angry, so he asked the guy if he really wants to explain to him right now and prove that the patient is alive. Can't he see that blood is flowing from him? But Ray tried to calm them down, because for him it was not a problem. This is a normal moment during the operation. The most important thing is that the patient is alive. But no one wanted to listen to him, since he simply opened the body of the deceased. Does he really not have at least a drop of humanity? Ray clutched his head, as it was very strange to him that absolutely no one wanted to listen to him, despite the fact that he tried to explain everything. At that moment, the girl also entered into a dialogue, and told him that he had promised her that he could definitely save her father. She looked at Ray and started screaming because she just trusted him. But the guy continued to be shocked, because he really did his job well, and the patient really did not die. The girl asked to look at him. At the moment when the patient continued to lie down, not showing active signs of life, she continued to cry very hard, because her father had just died, because of this guy, since the girl brought him to her house. Ray was very upset. He could not understand why she did not believe him. All he asked was just to wait a little. It's really very strange, because what's wrong with them? Do they really not know what an operation is? Absolutely unexpectedly for him, all the guards began to insult the guy. One of them even put a sword to his neck. The guard started yelling that the guy had killed the Viscount. And now he still dares to argue with the young mistress. He called another guard for help, and also asked if what he had done with the body of the king was not enough for him. They approached him even closer, and began to threaten with weapons, which Ray clearly did not expect. He exhaled, and said that saving his life was indeed not easy, and instead of gratitude, they just bared their balls and sent them towards the guy. He addressed the guard in a rude tone, asking him to repeat what they were trying to accuse Ray of. Do they really believe that he is the swindler who killed the Viscount? From this, he got very angry, and became as aggressive as possible, saying that this time, they definitely contacted the wrong one. Indeed, not everyone is ready to endure the loss of a loved one, and everyone has their own different emotions. As a doctor, the guy understood this, and it was clear to him that they were seriously angry. He looked at the guards and put his hands in his pockets, waiting for the fight to begin. But he also gave himself an account that nothing else could be expected from this world, in which he had just begun to appear as a person. He exhaled, and tried to explain to them once again in a calm tone that the operation was indeed successful and that a little time was needed. He was about to leave, and said that they looked at the patient after a short period of time, since he needed to recover from the operation, and now, in order not to waste time, he would just go. He looked at them and got angry, making it clear that they should not stop him in any way. But the guard was very angry. It was clear that he did not like the guy from the very beginning, so there was a feeling that he was ready to break him right now. And so it happened. He could not control himself and pulled out a sword, saying that he would destroy the guy for disrespect. Ray was as cold-blooded as possible, since this is not the first conflict situation in his life. Who was trying to stab him with his magic chains? He did not expect that this could happen to him, because how could such a small guy be able to shackle him with magic? How is this possible? He was like a defenseless child, watched by his entire army and waiting for instructions. No wonder he immediately ordered an attack on this guy. Although he was scared, he understood that Rei would not be able to use several spells in a row, so he needed to hurry. But Rei was really smart, so with a slight movement of his hand he used his next grip. A few seconds later, 2 knights were immediately chained and disarmed. The most important commander was really frightened, and already began to worry a little, because really the guy in his youth had mastered double magic. The commander looked at him and could not understand how he got such knowledge of magic. But the guy really understood very much in him and is strong. It was clear that he was not ready to give himself offense, especially when he did everything as correctly as possible. He looked again at all 3 guards who were trying to catch him, and like a true gentleman, he said that he was warning them for the last time. He ordered the guards not to even try to catch him. It was already really dark outside. The guy spent a lot of his time with them, which he could have spent on learning from the same magic. He was upset that his time was wasted, and no one appreciated his abilities. He realized that no matter how far they were from modern medicine, but such behavior is already quite savagery. It was unpleasant for him that everyone held him for a stupid child. Besides, they also called him a fraudster. But he did not doubt himself a bit, and went to the door of his house, rejoicing that this was really the first patient who had been cured in this world. As he thought, his medical background is of little help in this world. His mother was waiting for the guy, and therefore decided to ask why he came home so late. But he told her that he was really very busy, so he didn't even keep track of the time. She began to scold him, because does he really not remember what time she ordered him to be at home? He was supposed to come back at 7 p.m. Did he not look at the time? There are really a lot of bad people in this world. Why didn't he think about his mother, and what would she have to do if something happened to the guy? Therefore, she punished him and now he will sit at home for 2 days. She continued to scold him and used her index finger while Rei himself just tilted his head and listened. It was very unpleasant for him, because why everyone everywhere keeps him for a small child. That is why this thought did not allow him to sleep peacefully and he spent the whole night in insomnia. Meanwhile, in the mansion of the king, to whom the guy just performed the operation, really interesting things began to happen. The king woke up and asked everyone what had just happened. In addition, he did not leave the thought of who is this guy after all. Everyone was shocked, including his daughter, who started shouting in the direction of her father from happiness, rejoicing that he could speak again. He burst into tears of happiness, because life returned to him again, which means that it is not yet time for him to die. The daughter and her wife were very surprised and frightened at the same time, because they had never seen such a miracle before. Who insulted the guy and wanted to destroy him was also shocked in the same way, because he couldn't believe that his employer was alive. But how could this happen? He hid his weapons and could not believe that the Viscount had really been resurrected. Immediately after that, they began to remember the words that they spoke in the direction of the guy. They took him for a scam. In addition, the guard also felt ashamed that he insulted him and wanted to kill him. The wife also closed her eyes and began to cry, because a young guy in whom no one believed could work a miracle. They looked at their room and realized that it was a huge mistake. After all, they did not even thank their savior in any way. That is why the wife ordered the security guard to take responsibility and find the guy as soon as possible. Patamushta, this issue is a matter of honor for their family. The guard was very shocked. Did he really have to take responsibility for this? He took a step and said that it was indeed very stupid magic. But his wife insisted that he find him as soon as possible and apologize for his rudeness, with which he, of course, agreed and began to carry out this order. The butler was also shocked, and still could not believe that such a young boy did such a miracle. Is he really a saint? Suddenly they all turned sharply in the same direction and were frightened by this phrase. They looked at the window and continued to discuss the guy, because they had never heard that saints could use magic, so it was incomprehensible to them. The butler looked at his king, and then asked everyone to also notice how prettier his face was. Have you all seen it? He's definitely gone to hell. The guard was terrified and asked everyone in the room, because if he is not a saint, how did he bring the king back from the other world? A huge emblem has appeared. So who are the saints? They are chosen by the gods themselves and endowed with incredible divine power. This is an opportunity to hear the will of the Lord. It is they who are destined for the fate of God's favorites, and they are also God, only in human form. The wife grabbed her chin and got very nervous, because was that boy really one of them? She had never heard that there were saints in their kingdom. Perhaps the rumors about his greatness have not yet spread strongly enough, since even the high priest could not cure the illness of their relative. If he is a saint, then the commander of the knights made a really big mistake. He already understood this himself, so he asked for forgiveness, because with his ignorance he disgraced the honor of the whole family. The wife was upset, but nevertheless said that it was the fault of all those who are in this room. Therefore, the girl offered to go in search of a guy and ask for forgiveness. At that moment, the father also woke up, who began to ask what they were talking about there. This scared his daughter a little, and he held on to his chest, where they had just been early after the operation, and also asked what is the other saint that they are discussing. What were they trying to do behind his back? But his daughter approached him, after which she reported that the saint was able to heal him. The father hit his papa with his fist on the blanket, and decided to ask, did he really wake up thanks to the saint? After that, he looked at the guards and started yelling at them, as they also managed to get rude to him. He was ready to tear them apart, because how dare they do that? He looked at his hands and felt young again, so he ordered them to find him immediately. It is necessary to connect absolutely everyone who is in the mansion in order to find it by any possible means. He once again looked at the room, after which he began to shout, ordering him to immediately begin this task. Well, Ray continued to sit in his room and read literature about magic, but he noticed that his ears were really burning very strongly. Did someone start discussing him so much? He spent the next morning in the forest, because he had come to this path since the very morning. His mother wished the boy luck and supported him in learning a new skill. He was very excited because he was standing with his wand and trying to use his spell, trying to activate the healing ability. But apparently something did not go according to plan, because the wand broke into pieces, and the hand was also partially damaged by such an action. Ray wasn't used to the fact that he didn't get something right the first time. He was already used to it, because he considered himself a young genius. He made one more attempt and then a fire formed from his finger, not at all what he really wanted. His mom found it funny to watch, so she took her movie glasses and popcorn, because the boy always managed to get fire, no matter what else he tried to do. But Ray was determined, so after another attempt, everything worked out for him and healing magic was formed. Unfortunately, it didn't last long and after a few seconds it completely disappeared, leaving the boy confused. He was very aggressive and upset, because he didn't understand why he couldn't do anything. He is a genius who has learned so much already, but only healing is not given to him at all. His mom kept laughing and told him to try again and listen carefully this time while she explained. Healing is a magic that increases vitality through mana. It is very useful. He was surprised that he managed to activate the healing ability this time. And not only healing, but also other types of magic that are converted into abilities. Mom tried to encourage her son and asked him to try again. Then she turned sharply and heard a strange sound near them. It was a deer that ran out of the thick of the forest and was looking for shelter. He needed help because his leg was injured. Mom suggested that Ray try to heal the deer leg. This will be good practice for him, he thought, and it was really more interesting than studying on a DAW. They agreed to approach him quietly so as not to scare him. Mom started to laugh, but Ray did not understand what was funny about this situation. They adjusted and began to carefully reduce the distance to the deer, but the boy did not look under his feet and accidentally stepped on a branch that broke, and this attracted the deer's attention. He became alert and realized that someone was sneaking up on him. They didn't have time to get a few meters before he jumped into the forest and ran. Mom nudged Ray and told him to catch up. He didn't really want to do it, but he listened to his mother and ran after him into the forest. Does a person who has been called the hands of God have to learn healing the hard way? Of course, because as a doctor he should have saved even more lives. If you compare what he did in his past life, people in the modern world did not understand the approach of modern medicine at all and did not trust it. Before every trip to the doctor, they felt anxiety and fear. Ray used magic shackles to stop this deer. The guy was shocked how quickly he ran even with a damaged leg. He approached the deer and started talking to it and promised to help with its wound. If magic is used here, then he is ready to do anything to get hold of it. The mother watched every step of her son and controlled the process. But she was very surprised when she saw such great strength in him. Before, he did not succeed in anything and he could not even show his abilities on a branch. He thought it was because he was still a doctor. Something went wrong and he needed to start over. After his magical powers, the deer was lying down and looked as if it was dead. The only thing that distinguished him from the dead was his breathing. Ray looked at him and could not understand what he was doing wrong. But after some time, they both realized that everything did not go according to plan. And he killed that deer. Ray thought he should be healed after his spells. Now he was a doctor who couldn't even cure a patient. The boy began to remember how he was taught this matter. It was the only thing he couldn't do compared to other wizards was heal it. It was all because his mana path was special among others. The main thing is not to use healing on people. He imagined that a patient came to him and asked to heal him. The guy applied his skills and the patient began to see the light at the end of the tunnel. As a result, the whole family will cry over the monument of a loved one. Ray understood that he should not use healing magic just yet. He couldn't afford to hurt anyone else. Mother and son walked through the forest and headed towards the house. It was already dark outside and all that remained was to enjoy the rest. Mom prepared a very tasty meat snack especially for dinner. When the eldest son asked what this delicious dinner was for, she was embarrassed. He added that it must be in honor of the fact that the son could not cope with the healing, and together they began to laugh and joke with Rei. He vowed never to study healing magic again in his life. Meanwhile, a planned government began in the Holy Kingdom. There was a very beautiful sculpture that seemed to start talking. The Holy Father felt this and fell on his knees before her. It seemed to him that she completely called him to her. She gave the task for the Holy Father to find this person. The Mother of God told him to go and find a new white-haired boy for her. While the guard went to search for a new saint, the knights discussed this news. As far as they knew, he was young enough. But he didn't matter if he was chosen by God. They believed that there was nothing wrong with the fact that they would have another saint. This is the first time in history. All this happened 10 hours before sending the delegation of the Holy Kingdom to search. Meanwhile, the owner called an assistant to her. He fell on his knees before her and thanked her for her mercy. He then asked what important business she had prepared for him. The mistress told them to find a white-haired boy in the kingdom of Cilia. Then there was silence between them, which continued for several minutes. He said that there could be thousands of white-haired boys in the kingdom, but the mistress said that the new saint is only 15 years old and he must find him and bring him to the kingdom. He accepted the task without any hesitation and promised to do it right away. He ran out of the room and immediately started calling for Aaron. The boy approached the men and asked why he was calling him. He ordered to gather a delegation. They need to go to Cilia Kingdom as soon as possible. The men thought about what kind of new saint he is, who is 15 years old. Chosen by God. Rei's father suggested that he try to learn the art of swordsmanship. This is a good skill that he can use to protect himself. Rei was interested in this and he really saw the meaning in this training, compared to his past life, where his basic needs could be guaranteed. But here sometimes you have to take risks even for the sake of one apple. He said he wanted to try it once. Dad was happy and offered to start training right away. They clashed swords on the training ground. Father praised Rei. For the first time, he showed himself quite well. The fact that he used to be fond of fencing helped him a lot. It was even very easy for him, but he still didn't have the strength to beat Dad. Therefore, he began to think about what he should use in order to win. What trick can be used? Rei stopped and seemed to refuse to continue the fight. Father did not understand what he was trying to do and why he stopped. He asked if Rei was ready to give up after a grueling confrontation. He did not like this word and he again stood in front of the enemy. The guy replied that he needed some time to change his strategy. Father was a little surprised that he chose to use the sword aura, and they crossed swords again in this duel. Rei attacked with great confidence. Even his father was shocked by such a technique. He even began to think about the fact that if he continued to attack like this, he would lose. He had no choice and he must also start using the aura so as not to lose. If he does not do this, then his chances of winning are almost zero. Rei looked up to his dad with delight and was proud of him. His strength was unmatched. And his aura was not like the standard one. He tightened his weapon and was ready to attack. When he hit Rei's sword, it just flew 10 meters away from him and the guy fell down as well. He was so engrossed in his father that he missed the attack. The father ran up to Rei and said he didn't mean to hit that hard and apologized. Recently, there have been a lot of scouts on the market. No one understood who they wanted to find and why. They were scouts from the royal castle. They were sent by order of the mistress. They were disguised as completely different workers at every step. They communicated with each other. And everyone adhered to the same opinion that it is impossible to find a person knowing only his age and hair color. This made them very angry. They were required to report every day, and again the managers came to learn about the results of the intelligence, but they simply had nothing to answer, because it was almost impossible. Especially if he was always somewhere at home. It was easier to find a needle in a haystack. White hair and 15 years old, this information is very little. He considered them completely ineffective and he only wasted time with them. Vicomte started yelling at them because they didn't have a clue after several days. In turn, Vicomte listened to morals from his boss. He said that he was an unusual boy and if people find out about his act, then a war would begin and the Holy Kingdom would declare war on them. If he didn't want to tarnish the name of their family, then he had to find him now. Vicomte was ready to pay any money to whoever would find him. A man was standing nearby who heard the whole conversation and he asked how much they would pay for it. If the payment suits him, then they will be able to fully count on him. He was not even a man, but a boy. He always had a smile on his face. After training with his father, Rei had a broken and cut arm. He apologized to his son and said that it was not on purpose. The boy laughed and said that there was nothing wrong. His mother ran up and asked what happened to his hand. She saw that there was a broken bone. Rei reassured his mother because they could heal her with magic. Mom said that she would fix everything, but the boy insisted that he would heal his hand himself. He began to heal his hand without any strain. A large amount of magic immediately concentrated around him, although there was no such thing before. Mom was shocked by what she saw with her own eyes. It was something new for her, and after a few minutes, the wound completely disappeared and the hand looked as it did before the injury. But his mother did not understand how he managed it. Because they trained for a long time and he did not even manage to heal a branch, but here he healed his hand without any problems. The father was also shocked. The mother reminded that his last attempt ended in the death of the deer. Ray realized that he definitely needed to explain the situation. He turned to his parents and said that he wanted to tell them something about himself. Ray began by saying that he was different from ordinary people. He was different, one of thousands of ordinary people. Mom said she never doubted that and he would always be the best, but Dad whispered something in her ear. Mom said they would always be by his side no matter what. Even if he brought home an orc daughter-in-law, they would still support him. This was too much even for those who were not superstitious. In the evening, the parents asked Ray again about his mana flow, because they had thought of something else at first. He replied that he uses his mana a little differently. He can endlessly use the streams of mana that he himself produces. These streams of mana were much stronger. Now the mother understood why his magic was so powerful. That's why when he uses healing on others, they just can't handle the streams of pure mana. They all remembered that the meat was very tasty that evening. The parents understood that their son was a genius, but asked him not to use these abilities on other people. This could be very dangerous, because he can't even heal ordinary people with magic. But as a doctor, he can't back down. He has to find a way out of this situation. Mom and Dad also began to think about this question, but nothing came to mind. The boy knew for sure that he needed more practice in surgical operations. After their conversation, Ray said he needed to leave for a while. According to him, he went for a walk. Because the guy could not say that he was going to look for new patients. Before leaving, his mother asked him not to go anywhere with strangers. He promised that he would not do this and would return soon. 2 tourists reached the village, but they did not think that it would be so big. They were going to pass this place quickly, but now they can even rest there. A guy approached them from behind and asked them to ask one question. He wondered if they had met a similar boy anywhere, with white hair and blue eyes. Such a handsome guy, but it was a very bad picture for them to compare anyone to. The guy started shouting and demanded answers to his questions. The men asked not to shout, because they really had not seen anyone like him. Ray was just passing by and stopped to see what was going on between them. In their place, the population increased significantly and various people came. The boy heard the name of the knight, which was familiar to him. He said he was paid a lot of money to find this guy. If he knew where he was, he would not have asked passers-by about it. It seems that he was a respectable young man. Then the knight looked to the side and saw this boy in front of him. The boy thought that maybe these people were looking for him. He ran up to the boy and began to examine him and compare his drawing. Then he moved even closer to Ray. He had white hair and blue eyes. The knight asked to write to the guild that he had found him. The knight tried not to frighten him and said that he was from the information guild. But Ray didn't care, he agreed to go. The men even liked it, that he was so young, but so sensible. He asked if he had been taught not to communicate with strangers. But the boy did not understand why he was being asked this. Ray said he knew they were looking for him on Viscount's orders. He just wanted to see his patient. When they were already riding the chariot, the knight asked the boy a question. What did he mean when he called Viscount a patient? Is someone sick in his place? Without thinking, he answered that it was true, without even looking him in the eye. Ray asked if he was all right now. After his treatment, the knight began to think of him as delusional. He was very similar to him. While they were talking, they were taken to the right place. The boy went outside with a smile on his face. As soon as he took a step from the chariot, all the servants began to greet him. They called him a saint and welcomed him into his kingdom. At first he was scared, but then he even started to like it. Although Ray was happy to be here, he had something to say to the king. He was not the saint they were looking for. They found the wrong one, but the king did not allow such a thing to be said in his presence. He knew that the boy was a saint and was sure that he had saved him and his family. The king considered Ray to be the one who raised him from the dead. Therefore, he cannot be a saint. The guy said it was a normal standard treatment that any doctor could do. Then the queen joined in and she was also sure that Ray had saved their family and wouldn't let him deny it. The woman made her daughter Alice express her gratitude to Ray. She was a little scared, but thanked him for saving her father. She was wearing a very beautiful dress and elegant gloves. The boy paid attention to her, but could not remember her from last time. Especially the last time, when he treated her father, she said that he was brought for nothing and that he would not be able to help. Parents were shocked by such behavior of their daughter. Dad turned to her and asked if he taught and raised her in such manners. He ordered to quickly repent and apologize. Ray was very flattered and liked it. He tried to say that he was not offended and just decided to joke. The boy didn't understand why they behaved like that, because he didn't really do anything special. Then he turned away from the royal family and returned to the maid. He asked where the guy who came with him had gone. She answered that he left almost immediately. This guy was running in an unknown direction very fast. He couldn't believe that the boy was really a saint. He was very happy that he managed to learn such valuable information. He needed to get to the guild as soon as possible to inform the guild. Ray hoped nothing bad would happen to him on the way. The boy was treated to delicious food and asked every time if he liked everything. The king said that they were trying very hard and he was very happy that he liked it. The boy admitted that he doubted that he would ever be able to taste such food again. He could not worry about it, because after he arrived in the Holy Kingdom, he would eat this every day. Ray froze on the spot and couldn't even swallow his tea. He asked the commander what he was talking about. The man thought that he had already been informed. The delegation of the Sacred Kingdom has already arrived and is ready to take him home. The guy was angry and asked how they even found out that he was here. There were rumors that the father received frankness from the mistress herself. Ray didn't understand what they needed him for or what that meant. A holy kingdom that was blessed by the gods. Every time the saints appeared, the mistress sent frankness. She didn't speak directly to people, but she comes under signs and hangs. They say that a nimbus always shines over the saints. It blinds the eyes. The boy asked what he should do now. The commander replied that he needed to go to the Holy Kingdom. They sincerely congratulated him on such a significant event and wished him only luck. Meanwhile, his parents did not even suspect that he was not at home. Mother thought that he was very tired from the walk, so he did not leave his room. Father said that he should not be disturbed for now. Before going to sleep, Ray thought about everything he had been told about the Sacred Kingdom. He was so worried about all this that he fell asleep very quickly. He just wanted to live a peaceful life in this amazing world. The morning came and Cilia Castle greeted passers-by with its glow and beauty. The maids talked among themselves about who had arrived and was living in their annex. It was a holiday from the Sacred Kingdom of Gay. Finally, the holiday came to their kingdom. One of the maids asked what she looked like. And she heard that this girl received a blessing even in childhood. She had beautiful hair that reached her waist. Her eyes were like pink diamonds. It was said that she was so beautiful as if she were always illuminated by the sun's rays. If they are lucky, they will be able to see her while she is in their kingdom. Saint was looking out the window and at that moment a servant knocked on her door and asked if he could come in. The girl replied that he could enter without any problems. He opened the door a little and said that she had to go to a dinner party. She was upset that she was not allowed to rest for a second. The servant allowed himself to say that the saint should hurry in order to be in time. While she was leisurely preparing for dinner, she remembered one thing. She asked the servant if he knew anything about the saint. He just had very good news on this matter. The girl could not believe that her life would finally become a little easier. A smile immediately appeared on her face. She had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Finally, he will arrive and there will be a person who will understand her. Ray still managed to escape from the commander and return home, but he understood that now they know where he lives and it will be very easy to find him. He couldn't come up with anything. If people from the Holy Kingdom caught him, he would be finished, and his second life will be much more complicated than the previous one. The boy will have to pray to a god he does not know. He shouted aloud that he did not want this. And at that moment, his parents entered his room. Ray thought about telling his parents so they could run away together, but the fact is that they have nowhere to run. They have a job and a house here. Wherever he hides, the Sacred Kingdom will continue to search for him. The mother noticed that the son was very nervous since the previous evening. The boy did not answer her and did not say a word. He burst out of his bed and said he needed to leave for a while. His parents could only guess what might have happened to him. Meanwhile in the kingdom of Salia, the Viscount was speaking with his commissioned knight. He told him that the Holy Kingdom itself was interested in this boy. That is, his guesses were confirmed about that. That he was a holy boy. He could be identified by his blue eyes and white hair. The knight said that he could rely on him, because he came to him as soon as he received this information. Viscount understood and already submitted the information to the Sacred Kingdom. All that remained was to find this guy. He decided to send people to look for him on the outskirts of the city. Most likely, he lives there, because it is clear from his appearance that he is not from a wealthy family. Everyone will be looking for a guy in the village and thanks to this they will buy time. Then it will be as they agreed. When the kingdom pays the money he will return. The knight looked towards the forest and thought. He had a question. Viscount saw that the knight was distracted and decided to ask what was wrong with him. The boy pointed to the forest and asked if they had already searched it. The commander immediately changed his face and asked if he didn't know who lived there and why they didn't go there. But the knight decided not to rush to conclusions and assumed that the saint could live there. But the commander was sure that if he lived in that forest, he simply would not be able to survive there. Those who are there do not like outsiders at all and are never happy for them. They knew only themselves and their values, but for some reason the knight had a strange premonition that he might be there. And his house can be located exactly in the place that everyone avoids. The forest gave its guests peace and tranquility. Its light rustle of leaves could enchant anyone. Ray decided to take a walk in it. He was thinking of getting some air and figuring out what to do next, but unfortunately he had no idea how to prevent it. Is there nothing left for him but to run away from his family and his fate? But the boy also did not want to spend his whole life as a fugitive. He sat down on a large stone and wanted to put his thoughts in order. And while he was thinking about the future, someone could be heard walking through the forest from afar. He quickly stood up and began to sort through options for further movement. With every minute the sounds were getting louder and closer. He couldn't believe that people from the sacred realm had already found him. After a while these sounds disappeared. Ray decided to wait to see what would happen next. But it seems that these sounds from the depths of the forest just dawned on him. While he was looking in one direction, the trees and bushes began to rustle in the other direction. He did not understand what was happening there and began to carefully inspect the area. Then he heard the tree begin to speak to him. The boy clearly heard this voice, but did not understand where it came from. This voice asked him what he was doing in this forest. He thought maybe it was a forest spirit. But he replied that he just stopped to rest a little. But he was told that this was their territory and he had better get out of here. He did not pay attention to their remarks and said that he wanted to sit a little longer. The voice repeatedly told him to go away. Ray became wary of whoever was talking to him. He was indignant that some persecuted him, others chased him away, but he wanted the voice to understand that he was leaving because of his own desire, and not because of what he ordered him to do. Before leaving, he asked him to come to him and show his face. There was no reaction from the voice and no one was going to come to him. Since there was no direct threat to him, he decided to sit still and rest. A voice appeared again, ordering to go away right now. But the boy absolutely did not respond to these requests and continued to enjoy the surrounding nature. A silhouette appeared behind the tree and said that he was at a loss for words. What an ill-mannered human creature had come into their territory. But Ray replied that he didn't even come out to greet him because one of them was still ill-mannered. The boy was carelessly lying on the stone he had chosen for himself from the very beginning. And some creature suddenly jumped out in the boy's direction. He noticed this and was very scared. But he needed to protect himself somehow. Ray used his powerful mana streams and fought off the attack. He quickly jumped down from his resting place, and he began to complain that he was attacked unexpectedly and no one does that. If he hadn't left his mana active, he wouldn't have been able to defend against this blow at all. He then looked at the person attacking him and was surprised. This person was wearing strange clothes that he had never seen among ordinary people. The ears were very long and pointed, and as a result, it turned out to be a girl. Thanks to her appearance, the guy assumed that she was an elf. He was at a loss as to what an elf was doing in this area. The girl noticed that he had completely blocked her abilities. She realized that this guy was not an ordinary person like the others. He was ashamed and said that it was really true. In this case, she categorically forbade him to be on their territory. The girl began to prepare her next attack, but the boy hoped that after the first she would calm down and understand that there was no point in this. When they collided in a duel, there was a huge explosion. The girl flew several tens of meters away from Ray. But when she looked at him, she saw that he was in perfect order. He just soiled his shirt a little. She could not believe that he belonged to a superior race. He stood and did not understand what the girl was talking about and what a higher race was. Then she said that she had changed her mind and would let him stay with them in the forest. Then she asked him to follow her. But now he himself did not want to stay and said that he had to go. The girl said that they respect the strong. These are the rules of the forest elves. She invited him to their village. Ray did not know that in this forest there is a village where elves live. Although at the beginning she tried to attack him, but she was not bad. Just like any normal person, she defended her home. The boy agreed. He only had one request. That she stop attacking. After the agreements, they set off together on the road to the village of elves. Ray noticed that she hadn't even introduced herself to him. The girl replied that she was called Fila from the Gradle Flame. The boy stopped and thought about what a beautiful name she had. But she did not like this flattery and began to get angry with the boy. In order to correct the situation, he began to say that her name was terrible and he did not like it at all. The guy said if she wanted to address him, she could call him Ray. While they exchanged words, Fila said that they were already there. The boy was very surprised when he saw such a village in front of him. It was very beautiful and clean. He had no idea that they could have such a village. Did she really spend her whole life in the forest? Because he had never been here before. The other elves noticed him and realized that an ordinary person had come to their village. It was Fila who brought him here. They started asking her why she did it. Their reaction was expected and fully reasoned. It is logical that they will be concerned about the safety of their town. Another girl ran up to Fila. She was very happy to see her at home. Then she asked who this guy was. She assumed that it could be a new assistant. Fila replied that she thought he should be brought here. Everyone began to gather around the boy and look at him. He looked like he couldn't even defend himself. Fila also thought so when she first met him. Then she tried to chase him away, but she couldn't do anything. He was stronger than it seemed at first glance. The girl was surprised that he managed to stop Fila's attack. At first she thought that maybe he was from a higher race. But it seems that was not the case. The girl began to look at him and from the outside there were no signs of super abilities. Fila asked her friend how Lady Ira was feeling. She lived in a house that was built especially for her. Since it was above ground, it was safe enough. The girl replied that nothing had changed and she continued to sleep, and she also remembered that an elder was looking for Fila and she needed to go to her. Fila interrupted Ray's communication with the other residents and told him to follow her. He knew that elves do not treat strangers well, but it seemed to him that he was received well enough. Fila said it was all because she brought him here, not someone else. He thought that this girl was trusted in her village. Respectable people in their village lived in trees in special houses. So they went upstairs and knocked on the door. Fila met the elder and said that she had come at her request. The woman greeted her and was very happy to see her, so she invited her to visit her. She insisted that she come in because they had not seen each other for a long time. Fila began to ask about her well-being and the news that appeared while she was not at home. She replied that everything was normal and she was interested in who came with her. Fila said she brought the human child because she thought he might agree as an assistant, but the boy asked to wait, because he did not agree to become their assistant. As a result, they still came in to drink tea and discuss the news. Fila assured that this would give him many advantages. He would be able to move freely around the village and even make friends with other elves. But the boy did not understand why he needed it and why he had to agree. The elder began a conversation about why she was looking for her. It was necessary to keep this conversation a secret from the other elves. Fila turned her full attention to the elder and was ready to listen carefully. The girl said that she would take this secret with her to the grave. The elder also said that this boy should also go outside, because the conversation was really very serious and important for their village. Ray went outside and could not believe that he was being manipulated as they wanted. First come, then leave. He had time to think about his future. Become a saint in the Holy Kingdom or become an assistant to the elves. It was a very difficult choice for him. He didn't really want to choose any of these options. Meanwhile, in the kingdom where Cilia were involved all to find the saint, Svayatka asked the assistants if they were able to find out anything about him and find him. But they all answered the same, that they did not have any results. The girl said that they could not find him only because of their laziness. They began to cry and swore that they had done everything for this. But if they did everything possible, then why there were no results until now? Why does she need such servants? They asked to give them a little more time and they would definitely be able to find him. The saint was upset because no one in this world could understand her like another saint. She thought and decided to give them one last chance. But she said that they might not even come to her with bad news. This time they must exceed their capacity or her patience will simply wear thin. Fila talked to the elder alone and did not understand how she could die due to mana. Her breathing problems are finally over, either the disease is receding or she is living out her last days. Besides, she is still unconscious. Fila was stunned by such news and did not know what to say to her. After they finished talking, the girl went outside to Ray. She was completely broken and the boy saw it perfectly with his own eyes. The girl did not say a word after the conversation, and tears welled up in her eyes. She stood silently and looked at the lady's house opposite. Ray decided to ask why she was so upset. The girl said that the person who lives in that house is sick and most likely it is an incurable disease. Then she thought that he was eavesdropping. But the boy said that he didn't do it on purpose, he could just hear something even through the door. Ray thought about it and he also lost his temper after he found out. The girl told him not to worry, because he was human and they were elves. They belonged to different races. Sometimes even people can't understand each other, and this includes different races. Only he wanted to make one small clarification. There is no shame in caring for others regardless of their race. What difference does it make for whom his soul cares about, and the soul of a creature of another race is exactly the same. Fila forgot about their main problem even for a minute after this speech. They went to her house to drink tea. When they sat down at the table, the girl kept looking at the boy without taking her eyes off it. He seemed to her a very handsome and attractive guy. She watched every action of the boy and how he drank tea. Then she caught herself thinking that she was starting to like him as a boyfriend. Fila did not understand why this was happening to her. At that time, the boy turned to her with a request. He asked about Lady Ira. She said that she was dying. Ray decided to offer to heal her with his powers. Fila was shocked by such an offer from him and lost her voice. He said that his goal is to help people. And he does not care about race, whether it is a person or an animal. After she thought a little about his words, she decided to ask if he was sure that he was capable of such a thing. He said that he is sure that any disease can be cured. And he can try to help her. But he didn't even know anything about her condition. How could he say such things? The boy saw that Fila did not believe his words at all. He began to think how he could prove to her that he could heal people. Then he raised his hand sharply and tried to use his mana streams. Fila jumped up and quickly grabbed her sword so she could defend herself against the attack at any moment. The boy used his abilities to create a blade out of mana. After that, he swung and stuck it deep enough in his leg. He felt a sharp pain and was in no hurry to remove the weapon from his leg. The girl threw away her sword and began to scream and ask why he did it. When Fila ran closer, she saw that there was a very deep wound. After she looked, the boy began to use one of his healing skills. The whole house shone. His energy seemed to penetrate the walls. Fila did not have time to observe everything that was happening at that moment. After he accumulated this mana, Ray channeled it into his wound. He spent a lot of energy in order to demonstrate his abilities in the best way. Even the elves who were not far from the house saw that the light was radiating from it. You'd think it was some sort of mystical tree house. This went on for about a few minutes, and when the boy finished he looked very exhausted. However, his wound was completely healed in those 2 minutes. Only his pants were damaged. Fila tried to explain this fact in her head. Ray said that if there is a person who can heal that elf, then it is only him. The boy was sure that he would definitely be able to help her. But when they voiced their proposal to the elder, she said absolutely no. Fila tried to explain to her that this is their chance and they cannot treat Lady Ira so irresponsibly. She was someone they respected and worshipped. But even with good intentions, they cannot take such a risk. The elder cannot allow an unproven medicinal method to be used on her. No matter how the girl tried to prove to her that they could really help, the woman refused to even listen. She asked them to go about their business and do something useful. Fila was upset and even angry with the elder for not giving her the opportunity to even try. Ray thought, what's the point of her not even trying? Who will they worship if she dies? Fila and her boyfriend went to the forest for a walk. It was obvious from the girl that she was very upset, especially since she saw Ray's abilities and believed that he could help. She really hoped they would convince the elder to agree. Ray said that everything was fine and maybe she would be able to heal without his help. She started to smile, but her smile showed desperation. Ray asked if he could visit them in the village sometimes. She replied that she could, and, if she wished, she could even stay to live with them. The more he earned the recognition of the other elves. The guy listened to the girl to the end and thanked her for her kindness and sincerity. He said that he would leave. The girl did not think that the boy would leave them so quickly. Ray was a little embarrassed and said he had some business ahead of him. He promised to come back tomorrow, so he asked Fila not to miss him. It angered her, although she understood that it was true. When he left, the girl felt relief and sadness at the same time. She watched as he moved further and further away from their village. At the same time, the girl could not tear herself away from his silhouette. She couldn't take it anymore and decided to calm down and leave. As soon as the girl left, the boy left the path and ran into the forest. He wanted her not to see his next actions. Ray climbed into the nearest tree and began to examine the village. He tried to find among the many houses, Lady Ira's house, and so he finally saw him in the distance on the highest tree. The guy looked at him and said that doctors never abandon their patients. He needed to get to this tree without being noticed, and he did. When he opened the door to the house, it was like a royal court. It seemed to him from the street that it was an ordinary tree house. He began to look for the lady's room, and when he found it, he quietly entered her door. As soon as he opened the door, a glow rushed from the lady into that crack. Everything around in the room shone and glittered, because the house was located specifically opposite the sun. The boy came closer to her and saw an exceptionally beautiful elf. She was lying as if she were already dead. All in white, beautiful clothes. The body was not completely covered with a cloth. Her hands were folded on her chest. She was very beautiful with long, beautiful hair. But her eyes were closed. Ray liked her very much, because her beauty could enchant anyone. He tried not to be distracted and to collect himself, because he could not lose his common sense in front of the patient. He took her hand to check the lady's pulse. Then he bent down to her face to check if she was breathing. All this was normal, so the reason for her sleep was something else. He took her hand tightly again and held it. It looked romantic enough. Ray wanted to look inside the body with mana. He could walk through all her nerve cells and check the whole body, but her body was also fine, otherwise he didn't even think she was dying. Will he not be able to cure her? It was necessary to better study the peculiarities of this world before rebirth. While he was with her, a strange smell began to appear in the room. The boy also felt it on himself and began to think about what it could mean. It seemed to come out from under the body of this lady and was not very pleasant. When the boy turned her over and saw what was happening to her, he was shocked. This horrible smell was coming from the bedsores on the back of her body. He did not understand how they could bring her to such a state. They told her how much they loved her and adored her, but they couldn't even take care of that. He needed disinfectant to treat his wounds. But where could he be taken, because now his possibilities are limited, because no one knows that he was next to the lady. When he looked up, he saw from the window a very beautiful lake and a green meadow. He immediately went there and found a leaf in the form of a water vessel. Then he went to the lake and collected clear water there. He couldn't directly use his healing magic because it was dangerous. He still remembered the deer he tried to heal. So now he decided to channel the healing power into the water. In any case, he had no choice but to act on this plan. He returned to her room, cleaned his hands and began to use the water to heal her wounds. At the last moment he stopped and remembered that this was a creature that everyone respected and worshipped. The words of the elder stuck in his mind that she did not allow the use of the latest methods to treat Ira. He hoped that later he would not be punished for having dared to touch God's creature. Her back looked terrible. This was logical because she had been lying in one place for several weeks and no one had turned her over. In any case, how could they abandon her in such a state if they respected her so much? They had no reason to forbid saving her. Hopitz began treating her bedsores with his healing water. He carefully moved along her body and gradually healed the wounds. Ray was so engrossed in the process that he didn't notice it getting dark. He had to go, because the journey home would still take some time. Until he could figure out the cause of the illness, this was the best he could do for her. He decided that he must come tomorrow. Meanwhile, the servants in the kingdom were looking for the mistress to bring the news. They should soon receive information about the search for the saint. Their guild is searching all the kingdoms, so it was only a matter of time. The girl has already heard it so many times that it just immediately becomes unpleasant for her. She warned them that her patience was on the limit. That is, they allowed themselves to test her patience. The servants fell to their knees and again began to cry and beg for mercy. The girl was already fed up with their bullying and she had enough of that. She got up and said she couldn't trust them anymore, and she will personally search for him. Svayada asked to prepare ammunition for her departure. Meanwhile, Ray once again came to Lady Ira to wash her wounds. They noticeably healed and after a week the boy expected that they would completely disappear. Everything went very well. Every day he entered her house and worried about her. First, he wiped her body with purified water, and then warmed the stiff muscles to circulate the blood. The rest of the time he spent in her study. There he studied her boring books and this became his daily routine. The boy looked at her drawings and had fun in this way. Of course, she never answered his questions, but he always spoke out loud anyway, told her about how he got to her or what happened with Fila, and also about other things that came to his mind. And thus a month passed. Ray came to her house the next day and opened the door. He began to tell that Fila had a day off and they decided to have tea. But when the boy came closer, he felt this terrible smell again, but much stronger. He stood shocked at the entrance and did not understand what was happening. Ray then dropped his bag and ran over to her bed to check on her. But she was barely breathing and if a little more time passes she will die completely. Something prevented her from breathing and it would be noticeable even to an ordinary person. He could not even think that this could happen. The guy started looking for a ventilator, but then he remembered that he was not in the hospital. He was very angry that he was powerless in this situation. The only thing he could do at that moment was nothing. He just literally watched her slowly die. But he could not allow that, because this is his patient and he will fight to the end. The boy looked over her whole body once more to find the reason. But there were no external damages and no traces of poisoning either. Vital organs were functioning normally. Then it was not clear why she was dying. He had to find a way to heal her. He began to think and remembered that he possessed strong mana streams. But should he have used his power? Will Ira be able to withstand his mana and not have the same result as with the deer? The thought of this made him laugh a lot and he smiled. He studied medicine in order to save people, not to be afraid of them. And at such an important moment, everything flew out of his head. But he had to pull himself together and do his best. The boy began to activate his mana and concentrate it in one place. The whole room was covered by a bright glow that penetrated the walls. The house began to shimmer thanks to Ray's powers. Many elves who were nearby saw the same glow again, but already in the lady's house. Ira was filled with his magical energy and began to glow as well. Ray hoped she could withstand such powerful mana streams. The guy gave all his strength to heal her, and tried to control the mana so as not to hurt Ira. She rose to the very ceiling under the influence of magic. Her body seemed unreal, as if from a fantasy film. Fila saw that many people gathered near the lady's house and decided to check what was happening there. When she ran up, she saw a bright light coming from the lady's house. She had only seen such a glow once, and that was when Rei was healing his wound. Is he still trying to save their Lady Ira? She did not know how long he had been doing it, but even a creature of another race cared much more for her than they, those of the same race. She ran into her house, opened the door and saw something crazy. Rei used his abilities to make some inexplicable movements. There was a huge concentration of mana around him. The girl could not even imagine that this was possible. Rei gave all his strength to this healing. It was incredibly important to him. He needed some more time to fully finish this process, and finally he stopped, and all that remained was to hope for a positive result. She was still in the air under the boy's mana. After some time, this barrier collapsed and Ira was free. Due to this powerful wave, both Fila and Rei simply flew away several meters. The boy was affected much more because he was the one using this power. He fell to the ground, but even though he was in a lot of pain, he kept thinking about Ira. When he regained consciousness a little, he was able to open his eyes, and he saw in front of him a beautiful girl who radiated joy and beauty. He had nothing more to worry about, everything worked out for him. Therefore, he fell powerless, finally relaxed and closed his eyes. He did not understand where he was. The feeling was as if he was in water. It was a very pleasant feeling and he wanted to rest like that a little more. He opened his eyes a little and saw Ira, who was telling someone that she would take care of him herself. The elder argued with her and said that this is a human being and he is not their friend. He tried to do something with her body without permission. The boy realized that he was alive and heard Ira's voice for the first time. She told the elder that she didn't want to hear it anymore. They left her here to rot for 20 years, and this person helped Ira without hesitation. It even sounded funny. He was saved by a person who simply felt sorry for her, not those who worshipped her all her life. The boy seemed to be flying somewhere in the sky. He almost did not feel his body, and completely surrendered to the current in his thoughts. Her voice calmed him. He was very sweet. He shouted very loudly and started calling Ira. Then he calmed down and realized that it was most likely a dream. Rei tried to move his limbs to see if he was awake. Then Ira spoke to him and asked why he called her. She sat next to him and did not take a single step away. Ira said she would be there to help him recover. The guy was embarrassed and could not believe that everything worked out for him, and that he did not risk in vain to save her life. She came up and hugged the boy and thanked him for saving him. Ira also added that Iona drew the picture he found when she was sad, so she asked him not to laugh at it too much. Rei was even more surprised because it seems that she heard all his stories and conversations. Ira replied that she heard absolutely everything he said. The boy cried and the girl asked why he was crying. She was grateful to him because he was the only one who cared for her until the very end. And if he had given up, she wouldn't be sitting in front of him now. Ira said she didn't even know her rescuer's name. The guy finally relaxed, smiled, and said his name was Rei. She thought for a moment and said his name several times. And then she started to smile sharply and said that it was a wonderful name. It was already dark outside and they were still talking. The boy stood by the window and watched everything that was happening in the village. He offered her to come out to people when she had already recovered. After all, they probably care. The girl replied that for the past 20 years she did not really care about them, they did not even visit her. And none of them cared about her. Besides, her anger will not be able to disappear in one day. Rei listened intently and completely agreed with her opinion. Then he decided to ask how long it had been since she regained consciousness. But for some reason, the girl pretended that this word was completely unknown to her. The guy decided to repeat and asked when she started hearing him. Ira answered that she never lost consciousness. All this time she heard everyone. Rei was shocked by this and didn't know what to say. That is, she did not lose consciousness from the very beginning. She wanted to say that she was lying unable to move. And just waiting for something. Rei wanted to say so many words to her, but decided to hold back. The guy took her hands and simply said that she handled the situation very well. The girl was embarrassed and slightly lowered her head. And then something really moved her and she was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. The girl said that she hated the people around her. All problems were always caused by people and always remained unpunished. The mere mention of people made her hate even stronger. Then she firmly took Rei's hand and pulled them forward. Everything was fine with her body. Besides, her life had just begun. Ira said, until one person promised to heal her, she immediately got angry from her touches. But with Rei, everything was different. He did it selflessly and did not ask for anything in return. And like no one else, he cared for the girl and made a lot of effort. She remembered how he talked to her. And told how Fila invited him to tea. He said that he never thought that elven tea was so tasteless. The girl answered in her subconscious as best she could and said that their tea was really not very good. Then he read a book about dire flowers. The boy asked if these are the flowers that grow in her garden. She replied that it was them and he was very similar to them. Devotion and a smile, that's what these flowers meant. After that, he noticed her drawing and said that drawing is definitely not her talent. She already knew she was bad at drawing, but hearing it from someone else was strange, because no one ever contradicted her and always praised her so that she would not do it. Because everyone was afraid of punishment. The only thing she wanted when she slept was to answer Ray at least once. Ira could not stand it and her emotions overcame her. She began to sob in front of the boy. She covered her face with her hands so he wouldn't see her tears. Then she pounced on him and started hugging him. And thanked him once again for not giving up. Meanwhile, in the kingdom, the holiday did not find a peaceful place for itself. She asked the commander if he did not know exactly where the holy boy was. The girl came to visit him, so she apologized for such a late meeting and allowed her to go. Before leaving, she added something to her monologue. If they try to deceive her, the truth will come out sooner or later anyway. Saint looked at the map and thought about where she should go next. If they couldn't find any traces in the neighboring kingdom, the only place where they did not search was the nearby forest. She ordered the entire guild to gather and prepare to go into the forest. It was deep night outside. The full moon was walking among the stars. Ray asked Ira how the villagers would treat him now. She asked him not to worry about it because he had saved her life. Moreover, they did not intend to do this, and that says it all. And if someone treats him badly, it will only make her worse. You will have to have a personal conversation with such elves. By the way, despite the fact that Ira woke up, she still did not see the other elves. The fact that they did not appear to her even after she recovered meant only one thing. They were very frightened by this flow of mana coming from the house. Therefore, the problem was precisely with this guy, that they did not dare to visit their lady. Ira took his hand and said as he filled her with mana. He held her hand as tenderly as if it were his loved one. At first, she was scared and did not think that someone would touch her body, and even more so that it would be a person with mana. But when she felt the flow of mana, she realized that there are still good people left in the world. That's why she asked him not to bother. It was enough for him to just be next to her. Ray was very happy to hear such kind words addressed to him and it really calmed him down. Then the boy said that from the very beginning he was interested in how old she was. It was clear that the girl did not like this question and answered that it was a secret. He knew that elves lived much longer, so he assumed she was around 200 years old. Ira pretended not to hear the question and turned away. The guy was persistent so he asked again and said that maybe she was 500 years old. She continued to be silent. But when he said that she might even be 1,000 years old, she jumped up and said that it was already too much. She did not understand why he thought about her age at all. The boy replied that he was just joking. Ira pretended to believe it and started laughing. They sat together and watched the stars in the sky. The girl had never felt anything like this. Was it happiness? The guy said that it's strange to feel happy when people make fun of you. But she was sure that she was happy now. Ira could not feel happiness because she was never interested in anything. Ray interrupted her and said that now she can be happy. She agreed, but on one condition. If he will be next to her. The boy was not surprised because he understood that this situation had brought them very close. When he treated Ira, the feeling of inferiority or even lack of something did not leave him. Maybe he was the best doctor in his past life, but here he is just a helpless person hoping for luck. The most important thing in medicine is experience. He needs to gain experience in this world in various fields. If the Holiday Kingdom is the most developed in the field of medicine. Moreover, if they themselves are looking for it, then there is only one thing left. Become a saint and gain all the knowledge and experience of the Holy Kingdom. He was very sorry that he would not be able to stay with Ira, but he had no choice. They were sitting on the bed and Ray said that it got really loud outside. In the middle of the village, people gathered in front of the elder. Ray said maybe they should go out to the people. They protested against the elder because she was hiding the fact that their queen was terminally ill. She tried to apologize and said she made a mistake. Their denunciations became even louder. In such an atmosphere, it is better for them not to interfere. Ira understood that no one had come to her all this time. He saw that the girl was angry and asked her not to do this, but she did not listen and went down to the center to the people. The lady looked very presentable and beautiful. Her health was in perfect order. She stopped by the elder and greeted her. Ira looked angry and asked to stop these accusations. Everyone began to worship her and greet her, but she said she didn't want to hear it anymore. Ira asked if there was even one elf among them who came to visit her personally. Everyone was silent and no one could answer this question. The girl knew the answer to this question, but she still felt very offended. None of them even tried to find out what happened to her. And now they are trying to blame someone for their guilt. Although they themselves did nothing good. One of the elves dared to tell the truth about the elder. Ira thought he was just going to make excuses for their actions, but But he said that if the elder had told them what had happened to their lady, they would certainly have come to her. He suspected that she had personally ordered the elder not to tell about it. The elder watched this from the outside and understood what nonsense he was talking. Rei also heard and saw all this. This elf definitely made things difficult. Ira was extremely angry and was ready to punish the hypocrites. She has demonstrated her power and strength, which makes her their queen. The girl decided to order them and use minimal force for this. She threw particles of her magic at them and paralyzed the elves. They felt pain as from an electric shock. Ira sometimes has to be cruel so that no one takes her kindness for weakness. She considered these elves to be ungrateful scum, and if they believed that it was her fault, then she was ready to leave this forest. The elder tried to stop her, but it was in vain. The elves fell to their knees and began to beg for mercy and to stay, because without her they can do nothing. The girl climbed back into the house and Rei asked if she was all right. He couldn't even imagine what would happen to this place if the head of the elves left. This meant that they could be attacked at any moment. Rei reflected on this act on the part of the girl. Is she really ready to go to such lengths for the sake of justice? Ira was now very hard to calm down. She didn't understand how they could afford it, and when she missed that moment, her status as head of the elves became nothing. Rei waited for a good moment to pop the question and asked if she really wanted to go. She replied that it was a better solution than watching their arguments, and it was obvious that they needed her help all this time. He asked where she would go if she decided to leave the village. There was one place she always wanted to visit. She was not there for only 20 years, although in reality it is an eternity for people. If she is about 1,000 years old, then 20 years is really very little. Elves stood at her door and asked to come down and asked to forgive them. They begged to give them one last chance and they would make it right. Rei looked at her and realized that she said all this out of anger. But the elves didn't lie, she really wanted to leave. The boy was forcing her to admit that she really didn't want to. Maybe they did wrong, but in fact they needed her help and support. Ira thought about it and agreed with this opinion, although she was very angry with them. The story about the legendary surgeon doesn't end and continues to develop, and the dialogue between the guy and the girl is just beginning to continue, where Rei still manages to convince the girl that they still need her. His wonderful gift of negotiation, which he himself had accidentally discovered, made him feel really good and he began to rejoice. But the girl still continued to be troubled by something, so she decided to ask him something unusual. She turned to him and wondered, could he stay to live with her? Such a question definitely stumped him, because he had never had to deal with this before, except in his past life, and that was unsuccessfully, so he was worried. The girl tried to calm him down, because they would have much more fun together, but Rei turned around and refused, which the girl obviously did not expect and wanted to know the reason for such a sharp answer. He looked at her with a confident look and said that he needed to go to the Holy Realm. She was also surprised, for she didn't understand what he had to do with them, but the guy explained that they had been looking for him for a long time. The girl was also puzzled, for why would they do that? But the guy was amused and even embarrassed, because they all consider him really holy and say that the priest received a revelation from the goddess herself. His friend was even more shocked and couldn't understand what was going on right now. Was he really a saint? But he uses mana to heal, not divine power. Rei believed himself to be a saint, so he laughed and said that there was nothing wrong with not getting a blessing, although he noted that he didn't know anything yet. The friend was shocked, for how could it be, a saint and no divine power? Between a saint and an ordinary person, divine power is the main difference. She moved closer to him and decided to ask him if he had used magic when he treated her. He exhaled and averted his gaze. He hadn't planned to do that, it was just that the situation was really urgent and required immediate intervention. The girl noticed that her illness prevented her from using magic, yet she was conscious the whole time, so it was more like a curse rather than an illness. She remembered starting to glow and didn't understand how Rei was able to heal her with basic first circle magic. It completely overturned the whole idea of existing magic. Besides, is he really a saint, but without divine power? Perhaps we are witnessing the emergence of one of the most incredible saints in history. And Rei stood there and was just shocked, for still he himself had a hard time realizing it yet. The girl smiled and was also equally shocked, because exactly also before she had not encountered something like this in her entire life. She also tried to impress Rei, who looked at her, by saying that because there was still no way she could leave the village, she felt pathetic. She smiled and said that now they should start heading out. When they came out, there was already before them a vast army of the inhabitants, who knelt and bowed their heads before their chiefs, in token of respect. The girl came closer to them and was very aggressive, so she made them explain themselves for their words and actions. They looked at her and were very scared, so they started apologizing for their rudeness and for not taking her protection for granted. The residents continued to look at their leaders with fear and were ready for them to unleash all their anger on them. The girl looked at them again and was very happy. she realized that she had probably overreacted when she told them that she was planning to leave the village. She also exhaled and said that she could calmly understand why they were all angry at the elder. However, she hadn't done anything wrong either. Ray felt really funny about that. He realized that if people found out about it, they would all be in great danger now. But the leader continued to talk to them and accuse them and added that they are not absolved of responsibility because they didn't even try to find out anything. You are all to blame, but you should show respect for your elders, for if there is no elder, there will be no elf who can be responsible for the village. The residents continued to kneel with their heads down, making it clear that they had already realized everything and understood their mistakes. She was very pleased to be respected and listened to, so she smiled back at them as well. Whereupon the girl waved her hand, and since she had already calmed down, To smiled at once and asked, "How about having a feast in honor of her savior?" The boy was shocked by this, for he remembered what had happened to him during his first visit here. It was not apparent that he was excited after all, but he was tired of tithing, very curious and inquisitive. What was the feast after all? Meanwhile, some really strange things started happening in the bushes. It looked like a really real massacre had started there. At this moment, 3 warriors were already there, fighting a huge monster that was apparently guarding the forest from danger. The most important one ordered them to immediately try to focus on the target, for they needed to clear the path immediately. She waved her hand and used the exact same magical power, as today was the day they were bound to end it already. Meanwhile, the camp was not quiet either. Everyone was milling about and looking for Mistress Iriel. The warrior commander informed her that it looked like they would make it to the elf village within the day. She was drinking coffee and wasn't very satisfied. Maybe their scouting team wasn't that big. After all, didn't the commander think the search was taking too long? She looked at them again with her beautiful eyes and asked them what they thought about it, but he decided to reassure her, because there are really a lot of different monsters in the city, so they are moving relatively slowly in her opinion, although he on the contrary thinks that everything is moving really fast. She continued to drink to calm herself down. Still, she should have gone alone. It would have been much quicker that way. The commander began to cry and apologized to her for the inconvenience. She finished her coffee and threw the mug on the table, on which it began to wobble and nearly shatter. Immediately afterward, she stood up and ordered all of her soldiers to get up and get ready to move on, for they had already rested enough. The sky was blue and the weather outside really was perfect for a walk. Ray still continued to be in a bit of a state of bewilderment and euphoria. He was pleased to be receiving such a large portion of attention in his direction. Everything around was decorated by the locals and they created a festive atmosphere. Ray looked at the little town and didn't fully understand what it was all about or why such training was necessary. Locals danced and cheered, some were looking for a new date, and some were just enjoying themselves and celebrating their leader. Someone walked up to Ray and started tapping him on the shoulder, catching him off guard, which was unexpected enough for him. FIA called him over to her place, as everyone at the party was already waiting for him. She started smiling and asking why he was standing there, because he was the main character of the party. He was pleased, even though he thought the party would be more modest. "You are the savior of our village, how could we make a lesser celebration for you?" There's just one small nuance. The girl will not be able to attend the holiday, because she had some really very important things to do, so she wished him luck and said that he would manage without her. Ray was clearly unhappy with this outcome and asked where FIA was planning to go. She placed her hand on her holster, which held a large dagger, for the safety of the village could be jeopardized more during the holidays than on other days. It was at such times that the guardian must be most vigilant. She waved her hand at him and wished him a pleasant rest, informing him that they would meet later while the guy still continued to stand in bewilderment. It was obvious that he was clearly agitated and worried about something as well, so there was nothing left for him to do but hope that everything would be all right. He gave another shout to the girl who was already walking away. "FIA, I'll find you tonight, we'll eat something delicious." She was clearly shocked at such a statement and it seemed to make her angry. She ran up to the guy with red burning eyes and lifted him above her, asking if he really meant it all now. FIA was still just surprised. After all, no one had ever said anything like that to her before, especially since they also wanted to come to her. Ray noticed that the girl was very nervous, but he didn't pay much attention to it, because he realized that she lived in the forest all the time and it was unusual for her. Then she let him go and ran away sharply, for she had to run away. In parting, she shouted to the guy that he would definitely come to her, because he had made his promise. He lay very happy on the ground and didn't mind doing it, if it would only make her happy. It looked like he was really starting to fall in love with her. He looked at the festive village and wanted to walk around it. To one side, local guys stood around and competed to see who had the strongest pumped arms. And on the other, Ray was surrounded by several pretty girls at once, who started grabbing him wherever they could and asking him to go along with them. The guys also did not leave him alone and invited him to the table, where a lot of delicious food was prepared, which he loves so much. He was of course grateful to them, even though the whole thing had really worn him out a lot. The house, which is located in a large and powerful tree, immediately received information. Opened up old doors that were long overdue for replacement because of the unpleasant creaking noise they create. On the table was a cup of tea that had literally just been brewed, and everyone was asking what happened. Why did the chief guest leave the party that was organized in his honor? He clutched his head and began to smile, as he finds such activities difficult, and there was Northwest other quiet place to be. Ira smiled and said that since this was the situation, then let him settle down as he pleased and start resting. Ray stepped closer to her and had no way of knowing what that wonderful scent was. It made him smile at once, for were they really the same flowers that grew at the entrance? That's right, today is also a girl's special day that she is celebrating in this way, so she would like to share this beautiful moment with her boyfriend, and also poured tea into his mug. So he immediately began to enjoy this drink, as it was just what he needed in this weather. But still, he was still stuck with the question he so wanted answered, so he approached Ira and asked why on earth she wasn't going outside. She smiled and said it wasn't at all appropriate to talk about such complicated things over a mug of tea, so Ray apologized and said it wasn't appropriate at all if she wasn't ready for such a conversation. Ira thought for a moment. After all, there was no point in her hiding this information, so she began to contemplate where to start. A long time ago, there was a conflict between the common elves and the higher elves. It's all about the fact that high elves have a different status from ordinary elves from birth, so it's customary for high elves to be respected regardless of their age. However, an ordinary elf had a conflict with a young elfess of higher bloods. This forced her to leave the village, which had some consequences. She smiled and looked at the guy, for he himself knows what happened after that, doesn't he? He was shocked at the information he had received. Was she really not coming down for another conflict like this? Ira was very upset, so she didn't even know how to choose the right words. Suddenly her eyes opened abruptly and she saw something strange. It looked like what she was so afraid of had just happened. She turned sharply and looked back. She needed to act immediately, for every second mattered now. Ray also got excited and immediately asked her what had just happened. She put her hand on the table and said that something terrible had happened outside the village, but Ray was still trying to ask her for more details on what she meant. It's all about the fact that uninvited guests have just paid them a visit and they need to prepare for battle. Ray stood there in shock, for he didn't understand who she was talking about. As a sudden realization also came to him, were these really the same people who had started his search? As we entered the village, the sun began to set over the horizon and slowly night fell, which also brought fear. FIA stood and prepared to guard her home, not realizing what the humans had forgotten here. They also came here with an army of warriors, which would not go unnoticed. So she drew her dagger and prepared for a battle that could possibly be one of the last in her life if something went wrong. The chief of the army stepped forward and removed her helmet, announcing that they had come to this land in peace. She smiled and said they were just looking for a saint and would like to see him. But FIA wasn't in a very friendly mood. It looked like she was ready to fight to the end. So FIA, without wasting a second, started shouting in their direction and asking what people were here for. On the contrary, they were shocked at the sight of the elf, because they knew about them only thanks to rumors and did not even suspect that they existed in reality. But FIA wasn't quite ready to have a peaceful dialogue with them, so she was already ready to pull out her dagger and start a battle, but still before doing so she decided to clarify the reason for their visit. The commander looked at her with a smile and said they were looking for a saint and wanted to see him. FIA immediately realized who they were talking about now, so she tried to keep Ray and the village safe by saying that he wasn't here and they should have left. But the girl wasn't going to do that and with her arms spread out began to walk closer and closer to the elf, trying to talk to her and questioning her. Perhaps she had met the white-haired guy after all. As soon as FIA heard that, she immediately remembered Ray and clearly understood that they were talking about him now. It was very creepy for her to realize this, because her new friend or maybe even future boyfriend was now in jeopardy. The commander smiled, because she realized that with this question she had achieved her goal and found out all the necessary information. She was happy that they had managed to find out where he was, so she immediately informed her army. FIA yelled out that she had absolutely no idea who she was talking about right now, but she didn't believe her, because she knows this boy, right? After saying that, FIA became very aggressive and her anger began to overflow. But the commanderess continued to stand with her arms unfolded and tried to calm her down, informing her that they had come here in peace, and only in peace. All they wanted was a chance to see the boy and talk. She looked towards the elf and informed her that they would leave as soon as they reached their goal, so she could help them do so, in return for a reward. But FIA was not prepared for this outcome and immediately drew her dagger from her holster, making it clear that there was going to be a battle now and she would not make concessions to them. The army was also shocked by this outcome and some of them were also scared as they were not prepared for this. The commander grabbed her head and was clearly upset, because it looked like she wouldn't be able to avoid bloodshed this time, but without giving up hope she once again turned to the girl and told them to just give it to them and absolutely no one would get hurt. But FIA reported that Ray saved them, so for the sake of his protection in the village, absolutely everyone in the village will gladly stand up to them, protecting the guy. The girl looked at her with a perfectly calm face, which still showed moments of misunderstanding. If you keep standing in our way like this, a holy war could break out. With a smile on the outside, she asked if she was really ready for this. From such a question, FIA almost fainted and became very frightened, because she had never encountered such a thing before. She looked at them and realized that these were guys from the Holy Realm and they definitely didn't come here in peace, even if you made concessions to them. So she clenched her teeth and was fully prepared to give her life defending the village, and that's not easy to do. You need great willpower and those people you wouldn't spare to give your life for. FIA drew her dagger with a sharp movement of her hand, making it clear that there would be no peaceful solution and she was ready to confront them. The commander looked at her and realized that meant she was choosing war. FIA was very angry, so she asked, isn't this what people always wish for so much? The girl raised her hand and pointed towards her opponent with her index finger, leaving the question unanswered. She ordered her warriors to remove it, so they immediately began to do her bidding. FIA was prepared for this, so she waited for the crowd of frightened soldiers who were already approaching as close to her as possible. Suddenly she began to glow and some magical glare appeared around her body. It looked like something strange was starting to happen right now. The soldiers were also frightened and started screaming in panic as the girl disappeared right in front of their eyes. A second later, she was already at their backs and with a sharp thrust of her dagger, she delivered a crushing blow to their necks, after which she flew through like a bullet, piercing her opponent. The commander watched her and realized that the girl was actually strong, at first glance, but it wasn't that simple. After analyzing her fighting style and how she deftly dealt with the entire army, she wouldn't have thought that FIA possessed an entry-level blade aura. In addition to the soldiers, there were also priests in the army who began to pray during the battle, asking God to give protection to their bodies as well as their soldiers from enemy attacks, receiving a blessing. After activating divine protection, they also asked him to heal the wounds that had been inflicted by the enemy, which immediately began to happen. So FIA began to attack the priests as well, who began to hinder her a lot by reviving their warriors. The soldiers began waving their arms and shouting that the enemy was much faster than they thought, so they needed to get ready as the priests tried to help their other colleagues. One of the soldiers drew his blade and threw himself further into the fight, which was moving into its most active phase. The priest was trying to heal injured co-workers who were already lying unconscious and had practically said goodbye to this world. But FIA was able to catch up to him as well before he used his healing. It was very difficult for her, because there were too many of them and they were getting back on track very quickly with healing magic, so if things continued like this, she wouldn't be able to stop them. She started to panic a bit and a cold sweat appeared on her face, which informed us in the world that the situation was really not easy and it was worth making a decision instantly. So she looked at the commander and realized that she could be her next target to eliminate first to stop all of this. She skillfully and without respect stepped over the defeated soldiers and ran in her direction. And in just a second she was at the side of Iriel with the dagger, who did not worry in any way and remained calm. Perhaps he had no idea of the danger that was coming at her. On the battlefield, a very strong thump sounded, the sound of which spread out for several kilometers. FIA was startled, for clearly she had not expected this outcome of events now. Her strike was stopped by Iriel's simple magical defense and bare fists, causing FIA to hover in midair with complete incomprehension and rejection of the situation. She smiled and looked at the girl, letting her know with a smile that this was the difference in strength. After these words, she clenched her fist tightly and without much trouble broke the very magical dagger that the girl had fought so long and skillfully with. Taking advantage of the situation and the fact that her opponent was shocked, she immediately charged her fist with magic and prepared to deliver a powerful blow. It was indeed very strong as there was even a fire flash after it hit. FIA flew tens of meters upwards and was defeated. She had never had to fight opponents of this level before in her life. So with great speed, she fell to the ground, gathering dust and all the dirt that was on the ground with her body. Iriel calmed down and looked at the girl, asking if she really wanted to continue all of this. FIA looked at her opponent, who was rather blurry due to the fact that her vision had not yet fully returned from the blow she had received, and sighed. Covering the injured part of her body with her hand, she was very determined and made it known that she would never let them pass on. Iriel was amused by this, so she praised FIA for her persistence, even though it was really stupid of her. She stepped closer to her and asked her to make the most deliberate decision possible. No nonsense, just give them the saint and that would end all suffering and no one would get hurt. But FIA was determined and wasn't going to make any concessions at all, so she activated her magic ability and dragged the first stick she could find to her hand. This was her magical weapon for the first time, with which she was going to continue to confront Iriel, who still stood as calmly as possible and watched the situation with understanding. FIA was wounded but she was ready to fight. there was no way she was ready to give it to them. Help was on its way. Ray and his friend were still on the way and rushing to come to the rescue in time. The boy kept asking how much farther they had to run, but the girl reassured him, informing him that they were very close and she could already feel them not far from her. They tried their best to run as fast as they could to get to the place in time, most importantly, so that it wouldn't be too late. Ray visibly began to get nervous, for he didn't realize how many of them were there and how, and had they really amassed an entire army. What they saw shocked them. They could not even say a word for a very long time, because they did not expect to see such a thing. There was blood everywhere, on the ground, on the trees and even on the flowers. The battle was indeed very terrible and the loudest in the history of the village. Ray saw Fia, who was surrounded on all sides by an army of soldiers, and started shouting to her, trying to support her and find out what happened. She was already very hurt and her strength was running low. The girl was really struggling, especially after the missed blows that Iriel had given her. Ray was scared, so he immediately rushed to her aid, pushing all the warriors in his way, ordering them out of the way. They saw the gray-haired guy and were shocked. Did he really come to her rescue himself? Everyone was shocked, for was this really the saint everyone was talking about? They knelt down and saluted him, making it clear that they were ready to do his bidding and listen to what he told them. Iriel also stepped closer to him in her soiled heels that were completely stained from the battle, after which she also informed him that she was indeed very happy to meet him. She was all battered and dirty, but still introduced herself, calling herself Saint Iriel Beliaz. She was really very uncomfortable with her appearance. But Ray was very angry and looked at all of them with contempt. He didn't want to listen and take it all in, as they had caused a lot of trouble for his girlfriend. He turned to Ira, trying to find out if she was really thinking exactly like him right now. She ordered everyone to stay where they were and Ray to stay away from Iriel. Besides, if they don't want to die, they shouldn't block her path. The soldiers were shocked at such a statement, but they couldn't do anything, so they just stood still with incomprehension. The guys rushed to their friend's aid, trying to find out how she was feeling and saving her from a further battle that was clearly not in her favor. But Fia was in a state of shock and kept saying the phrase to herself, "Stop, I must stop her and not let her into the village." It was evident that she had no more strength and was badly wounded, for right in their arms she began to faint and fall to the ground, but the boys caught her. She started bleeding all over and her shoulder was very badly wounded, all the while having to fight alone. It was necessary to set the bone to put her out of such agony, but it would hurt a bit, but Fia was prepared for this outcome. There was no other way out of the situation. Iriel began to approach the saint and with a smile invited him to go to the holy realm from which they had come, for everyone had been waiting for his arrival for a long time. But Ray certainly didn't care about that right now, so he ripped open his t-shirt with a sharp hand, trying to make a peace tourniquet to bandage the wound. After that, he immediately rushed to his friend's aid to relieve her of such torment and cure her. Iriel was not appeased and reported that he was the one chosen by God himself, a great achievement, so it was time to reveal Ray to the world. He was shocked, as he clearly hadn't expected to hear such a thing. So he asked Iriel to repeat what she had just said. Was she really talking about accomplishments? That's right, isn't that an accomplishment where you are doing God's will? From this point on, they have a lot of work to do. Ray was in incomprehension, because he could not realize what they wanted from him and what exactly she was talking about. He looked at Fia, who was in critical condition, and asked, could they talk about such things now that she was not well? But Iriel was ruthless and informed her that all this was just a consequence of her refusal to obey her request. She could not go against God's will, so she offered her a reward and also warned her that otherwise force would have to be used, but she still refused. Waving her hands, she said they didn't kill her after all, but Ray understood absolutely nothing, was invading their territory and taking him by force, normal behavior. But Iriel informed with a calm face that they had no other choice. Ray was surprised. Did they really think he would just follow them obediently after all they had done? Iriel's eyes lit up and she began to threaten him, saying that she wouldn't want to use force on a saint. Ira started to get angry as well. After all, she was amused to hear such things. Apparently it wasn't enough for the army that they had invaded their territory, so they also dared to threaten her savior. So she got angry and suggested that Iriel reveal all her power to her. But Iriel informed them that the power of the Holy Realm would be no match for some elven woman. Ira was ready to fight, and since she was so confident in her words, why not put it all to the test and see who was stronger? The soldiers immediately surrounded her and asked her how dare she speak like that. It is not right to attack the safety of a saint, but with a simple force of thought, she broke instantly all of their weapons, which were already definitely not combat ready, just as Iriel had done to her friend. They were shocked, for they did not understand how such a thing was possible, though they had already seen so much today. Ira continued to look at them with contempt and hatred. She was ready to destroy each and every one of them. The soldiers were ordered to fight even without weapons, so they were frightened, but they still began to obey the order. All of this lasted until one of them fell to his knees and started begging Ira for mercy and asking for forgiveness. Ira laughed, for was this really the power Iriel was talking about? It looked like she couldn't get anywhere with these guys. Iriel also became saddened by this. It means their faith in God is weak and needs to be corrected. It also made Ira laugh even more, because did she really think that God was really able to give her power? In fact, they are all just limited by their faith. Iriel wouldn't stand for it, so she immediately activated her magical powers and was ready to fight, as such statements hurt her self-esteem a lot. She wasn't happy about Ira talking too much, so she threw herself into the fight, even though tears were already starting to come to her eyes. Ira smiled and used a grab that should help her in this battle. And it did work. Iriel was terrified, for the first time in her life she had been captured and disarmed by magical chains, something she clearly could not have expected. Ira laughed and asked, "What was it like to call yourself the power of the Holy Kingdom and be stopped by some Elfus?" Iriel was startled, but still asked, did she really think the Holy Kingdom's powers ended there? Panic began to take its toll and she announced that she would take Rei back to her lands at any cost, even if she had to pick him up piece by piece. At this point, the birds began to fly away from the scene of the battle as they realized that the situation right now was starting to heat up. Ira slapped her and ordered her to shut up and not to speak in a tone like that, something she clearly wasn't used to hearing towards herself before. If it's enough for her to take his body, then the guy's life is really precious to her. So she can at least use her powers now and show what she can do. Iriel was terrified, for Ira had said he had no problem wiping out her disgusting country, and her along with him. But Rei asked her to stop and stop bullying, for he himself had said he was going to go to the Holy Kingdom. This made Iriel very happy, for she realized that right now she would definitely be saved. Only he was going to do all this for a reason. He had certain conditions for it to happen. The guy still continued to stand there looking at Iriela. It was very important for him to get exactly what he wanted. She was also very much shaken and aroused, so she didn't fully understand what the guy in question wanted to get from her this time. Rei showed his finger and said the first thing he wants to do is that he will now call himself a saint for no God's sake. He will become a saint precisely at his own will and can also cease to be one when he wishes it. And Ella was very much surprised, because she was obviously not prepared for this. She had absolutely no idea what to do now and how to react to it. How would it stop being holy? It's really unacceptable. But the guy was determined and immediately made the second point of his conditions. If something like this happens again, he doesn't know what he will do about it. In this way he made it clear that he did not plan to tolerate any more of this kind of behavior towards himself and his friends. The girl was scared. Vitya, she didn't even realize how he would react. How would he act in such a dire situation? But the guy just threw up his hands and said he might leave the Holy Kingdom and become a saint in an enemy country. Iriela looked at him with bewilderment, for she did not understand how a saint could give a god. But still, she calmed down, because if he could betray a god, he would lose his divine power, so she wasn't completely worried and asked perhaps if there was anything else the guy wanted to get. And in the third, but equally important condition, is that he wants to use any library in the kingdom to study and gain new knowledge. The girl rejoiced very much from such a point, for indeed it is very easy to realize. But the conditions didn't end there and the guy immediately put forward a new one, which made everyone around him a bit surprised. From now on, they will all pay him compensation for his work, and also the other important things that they have to give him: clothes, food, and housing. And if they are able to give him all of these things, then he agrees in principle. But Commander SH was really surprised. After all, she had never heard anyone request compensation before. What did he mean? Rei started yelling at her, because really, did she not know what he was talking about? This is real money we're talking about. Iriela almost fainted from this, for she had never seen such insolence before. Already even the priests had begun to shout in her direction that it was definitely not worth it, for a saint could not make such conditions. They all began to talk, for how could a saint ask people for money? I'm sure he's not a saint at all, and God chose him wrongly. Hearing this, the girl was very much surprised, for perhaps it really was all about a mistake. She opened her eyes and looked once more at the saint, saying that they were willing to accept absolutely every condition except the first. But Rei started laughing and waving his hands, for the first condition was really the most important. The commander from this outcome of events once again fainted and did not even know how to properly negotiate and react to such a situation, so she asked the Lord's help to cope with all this. And finally it's time to announce the fifth condition. Rei pointed at Fia, the same village keeper that Iriela had beaten very badly with her soldiers, then ordered her to apologize for her actions. He was very aggressive, so he ordered not just to apologize, but to do it really sincerely. After saying that, he looked at Ira and asked her to untie Iriela to let her dialogue freely. She lost her balance immediately after this and began to fall as the chains no longer held her. Iriela fell to the ground and sadly began to say that she couldn't do that, meaning she wasn't willing to apologize for her actions. She looked at the guy again and asked him to consider her position as a saint who was doing God's will. Rei looked at her with disrespect and decided to ask her what position she meant. She was the first to attack, and she hadn't even considered the position of the guardian who was guarding the village. Iriella could barely stay on her feet and then informed that she had no other choice, she had to get the saint and bring him to the kingdom. It was all Fia's fault for ignoring all her requests. With a sad face, Rei looked at her once more before asking if she really wasn't going to apologize. But the girl was determined, so she closed her eyes and lowered her head before answering, saying that no apology she wasn't going to make. She began to analyze the situation, saying that she could have apologized if it were her misdeed, but the responsibility that lies upon her is very great indeed. One word could bring the wrath of God. Meanwhile, the sun had already begun to set over the horizon and night was coming, albeit slowly. Rei began to turn around and said that in that case he was ready to end the conversation. Now let God give them another saint if they were not ready to accept his terms. The girl was shocked by this behavior, because she did not imagine that everything could be really so complicated. She was used to that everything always obeyed her, but it seems not this time. Rei looked at his friend and said that they needed to get back right away as the keeper needed to be treated and helped. They started to walk over to Fia and tried to lift her up, which Iriella really didn't like very much. You could see she was clearly against it. She asked for her attention for a moment, trying to distract them from the activity. She said she may not be able to apologize, but she would do everything they asked, so she would ask him again to accept the offer. But Rei wants absolutely nothing more. He said that just an apology would be enough for him. The girl was very much frightened, for she realized that this could be very bad for her, but a decision had to be made right now. The boy had already taken the keeper in his arms and was about to leave with her, the moment the entire army of opponents stared them in the back. Well, in the meantime the night was already approaching. His girlfriend also became curious that everything would be alright. When they had already moved a fair distance away, Ira still informed him that it was not too late to go back, for they would welcome him with open arms if he so desired. And the guy thought about it, but all already reported that he is not a bit sorry for this act. If she cannot apologize for her act, then all the more should not go there. Ira didn't understand why the guy was doing all this for them. They're not even from the same race, and he was amused and very pleased. He's just doing what he wants to do. If we have already touched on this topic, it would be foolish not to find out what he really wants. The answer is very simple, a happy life. His friend became nervous, for in that case he should definitely have become a saint. The guy kept walking along with his wounded friend, and developing a dialogue. Yes, of course it would be nice, but being nervous about nothing and helping the sick was not exactly what he wanted to do for the rest of his life. The life he has now isn't really bad either, is it? He looked up at the sky and realized that finding happiness in the little things was his calling, and that was what would be enough for him. The girl looked at him with understanding and a smile, for there was indeed a great deal of wisdom in his words. They continued onward, and with every step, every minute, Ira was more and more amazed at the genius of this guy. A truly nocturnal atmosphere has already formed outside, as the sun will be fully behind the horizon in a few minutes, and the moon will replace it. Iriella continued to stand there with incomprehension and guilt, for through her they had just lost a saint. She began to remember the dialogue with him, also the moment when he started to leave, saying there was no point in continuing the conversation if she wasn't ready to apologize. She continued to stand there pondering all these phrases in her head, for had she really made a mistake? One of the priests ran up to her in a panic and tried to explain that perhaps there was some mistake here, as there was no way a saint could introduce himself in such a way. Iriella looked at her equipment and began to run that phrase over and over in her head. She then picked it up and threw it on the ground, which really shocked all the nearby team members. She ordered them all to go forward, exactly in the direction all these guys had gone, along with the saint. She was getting very curious. She seemed to have some sort of plan. After all she has to do is go to her elf village. The time was already quite late and, as you can already understand it, so immediately at the entrance to the village the guys were met by two strong elves who were very much worried about the guardian's condition and hoped very much that her injuries would really not be critical. Immediately afterward, they also saw Iriella walking alone towards that very village, but clearly no one here ever wanted to see her. So the elves immediately drew their weapons and pounced on the girl. They ordered her to stop and under no circumstances dare to come close to the place. But she spread her arms and informed that she came to this land in peace, so she wants to meet the saint who is in their village. The elves were shocked by such a statement, for just as well they had never known before that they had some kind of saint in the settlement. But nevertheless, they still didn't fall for this provocation and request, because even if the girl is telling the truth, they have no right to let a person into the village, so she needs to leave now. If she comes even one more step, they will consider it as an attack. The girl realized everything, so she stopped and asked them to relay the information to Ray that she was here and waiting for him. The elves were emphatic, they made it clear that doing so would be impossible, so the girl needed to leave right now. But Iriella was persistent, so she asked for their help and to let her just wait for him here. She looked at the elves once more and promised that he would not harm them in any way, but they didn't want to listen to her, so they said it would be much better if the girl kept her distance and stood in the same place, or better yet moved farther away. Iriella lowered her head in acknowledgement, then indicated that she would not be moving from that spot. The elves just looked at her with misunderstanding, but everyone was already further away from reacting to it in any way. They began to wonder who this girl was talking about. Did it really come down to Ray? Meanwhile, the girl dropped to her knees and covered herself with her jacket, seemingly preparing for some kind of ritual. Some strange sounds began to appear near her cape. She knelt down and removed all her shoes in preparation for prayer, whereupon everything around her began to glow. She did it very long and intensely. It looked like she was trying to apologize and redeem herself. The elves began to worry a little, because they had never encountered such a thing before, so they consulted and decided that they should inform Ray about it. It was already dark in the village and everyone was practically getting ready for bed, but right now our guys didn't care about that at all. They took FIA into a room and began the healing process. After a while, things weren't so critical anymore and finally Ray can take a break too. He felt very good about being able to help his friend who was willing to give his life for him, but suddenly someone knocked on the door. And he opened the doors with a misunderstanding and decided to find out what was going on and why wasn't he interested. Lion informed him that there was someone on the outskirts of the village who wanted to see him. Ray immediately realized what was going on and was a little perturbed, since they were still trying to change his mind. The guy got very aggressive and started yelling, asking how much is there, 10 or 20. Well, the answer really surprised him. After he found out there was only one person there, he couldn't believe it. It was already very dark outside, it was deep night. The moment he approached the village guards, they greeted him and began to explain the situation. In front of that they traded him hard and started asking where the culprit of the celebration had disappeared to. But it seems the guys had a good time without him. He couldn't help but wonder what kind of person was looking for him after all. The elves and simply pointed a finger in the direction of where the girl was standing, and informed him that she had been waiting for him all day and had not stopped praying. He moved closer to you and was clearly expressing his displeasure. She was shocked that he had come to see her, but he wasn't ready to talk, he just wanted to know why she had come back here. Tears came to her eyes, all she wanted to do was just talk. Ray didn't believe these tears and talk, so he just calmly asked her once more if the girl was going to apologize. But the girl was also still talking about how she couldn't apologize, but instead she was willing to prove her sincerity to him. Ray waved his hands and became very aggressive again, because if the girl is not going to apologize, then everything she did was in vain, doesn't she understand? She began to panic and tried to get up off the ground, trying to change Saint's mind that her feelings were indeed genuine, which of course he began to doubt. She looked at him and informed him that her status did not allow her to apologize, but she could pray for all elves until they realized it. Ray looked at her and said that if she remained absent from her post like that, the Holy Kingdom would go looking for her, and because of that, they would be attacked again and it would cause a lot of damage. Hadn't she even thought of that? She felt a little scared, but she understood everything, so she kept praying. She prayed to God that the Holy Kingdom would not take such measures. But Ray was skeptical. Did the girl really think he'd believe her so easily? But she convinced him that he should just take her word for it. And she pointed at Aira, for if her words seemed to be a lie, then wouldn't an elven woman be able to recognize such a lie? Besides, they would all be able to overpower her. Ray was a little perturbed, for should one really believe her? Iriella realized that her arguments had become solid, so the guy practically trusted her already. He waved his finger and said that he would only let her do what she wanted once. After that, whatever they did to her was not her problem, and if the elves turned her around and told her to leave, she wouldn't dare disobey them. Iriella was very happy about this decision, for it was exactly what she wanted. A smile immediately appeared on her face and the realization that she was now trusted. Ray immediately started walking towards the village, not even turning around or looking at the girl, but still she had some points she would like to discuss with him. Ray turned around and asked what else she wanted. She was very embarrassed and didn't even know how to ask it properly. But still looking at him with her sweet eyes, she decided to find out where she could clean herself up. The guy was very angry, because he had no idea that it would be so difficult, so he began to think to himself that he was already fed up with her. The dark night had passed and a bright sunny day had arrived. Iriella was still kneeling as well, only in a different place, and continued to thrash about. This was seen by the elves, who were puzzled as to why she was standing there. They just watched her and realized that if things did go on, she could spend the whole day there again. Didn't she have a problem sitting in one place for that long? At this point, Ray approached them and was about to head home, but the elves had a few more questions they wanted to know. They were a little perturbed. Was she really allowed to stay sitting here? After all, would she be all right if she was allowed to sit like this for so long? Ray thought about it and didn't even know how to do the right thing, because the fate of the whole village might depend on his decision. But Iriella looked harmless enough, for she had been praying the whole time. It was safe to assume what kind of god would do such a thing for him. Underneath the shell of this beautiful girl, there was a very real monster. So she spent the whole day sitting in one place, and without rising at all. It was already getting dark outside again. Ray walked up to the house, and he was very happy about it, as it had been a long time since he had been here and he already missed it. His parents, bringing the boy even a little scared, because they had already considered him missing but obviously did not expect to see him now, as they were engaged in their marital affairs. He smiled, and told you to keep going, he wouldn't bother them. After that he immediately closed his door and went to the other room, but his parents started yelling and making excuses, because it wasn't at all what he might have thought. He put his bag on the table and was really quite tired. So after such a hard day, Ray just collapsed on his bed and started to worry because he was really having a hard time. The guy immediately started remembering all of his past accomplishments and how he worked at his previous job as a doctor, which was still in his past life. But after all that, he remembered the Yura that reported that he should have gone to the Holy Realm. He remembered the girl informing him of this several times, even when they were healing the keeper. He asked Ira why she kept telling him this, to which she replied very simply, she thought he wanted it himself. She was very pleased that he cares about them, but he should not miss such a chance, because he got to the Holy Kingdom he will be able to learn medicine. So he started to get out of bed and remembered that he had made a promise to himself to learn how to cure any disease in this world. Immediately, he began to pack his briefcase and put various notes and books in there so that the training would go as fast as possible. He was very determined indeed, for he realized that he could not miss such a chance. The lamp on the table was still on and it was already quite dark outside, but he needed to consult his parents about this decision. His parents began to throw dishes and get very angry, for they refused to understand and accept what he was now saying. They couldn't believe that he was really a saint, and his father was drooling after this flood of information, but they still didn't understand what he meant when he said he had to go to the Holy Kingdom. Ray was also thinking about all of this and trying to get the words right, but his look said it all for himself. His parents were shocked, especially his mom, who couldn't believe that he was being completely serious now, but they also wanted to know when he should go there. And there was also an equally important question, would the boy be able to come home? Ray exhaled and really started to get a little worried. After all, the departure was already planned for tomorrow, but the thing was that it might take a few years, but he would definitely come home. His mom started crying. His dad was also equally upset, because they didn't want to accept this reality, because the guy would have to spend his whole life there as a saint. But Ray didn't worry about it, because he knew he would come back, so he promised his parents again that everything would be fine and he would definitely come home. His mom ran to hug the guy, asking where could it be that a saint could come back again, but the father had already stopped worrying and just accepted this reality, asking his wife why she was crying. After all, she just needs to let him go and everything will be fine. He also started to get tears. He tried to calm her down. After all, they could take care of themselves and have a good time until Ray got back, so he gave his consent to the guy and told him to go if that's what he wanted. Dad started to cry, but Ray tried to calm him down and tell him everything would be okay. He smiled and also started to cry a little, though he promised he'd come back in one piece, so it was definitely not something to worry about. In their big house the conversation went on, for even as a small child he had not roared like that, but now becoming a big boy he cried. The next morning, when the sun came out again, action had to be taken. Iriella was still on her knees as well and kept praying that all would be well and trying to atone for all her sins. Suddenly her stomach started to hurt really badly, so she started grabbing at it, trying to reduce the pain. But it wasn't as simple as it seemed at first glance, as the girl hadn't eaten anything for a very long time. She was the one who slowly began to hallucinate. Ray approached her and informed her that everything in this field was edible, so the girl could eat absolutely anything she wanted. After saying that, he turned and walked away, saying that she could do exactly as she saw fit. She looked at these plants and was very much perturbed. Should she really be eating these? But there was no other choice, as starving to death was not a good idea, so she took and plucked those leaves, after which juice started running down her arms. It was quite a horrible and not quite pleasant sight, but there was no way to escape. Just imagine that this girl had been eating only in expensive restaurants all her life and had the appropriate attitude. She ate the product and immediately tried to cover her mouth and nose in order to avoid vomiting. But after a second of time, her eyes opened abruptly and it seems the girl finally smelled that beautiful scent. She began to scream in pain, for this plant was very sharp and bitter. She was absolutely not used to eating such things. Her stomach was starting to really hurt and was giving out. She didn't have the energy to stand it anymore, so she held onto it with her last strength, trying not to vomit in the middle of the main entrance to the village. The elves watched the situation and were also very much surprised, for did the girl just eat the plant raw? But one of them was absolutely sure that people were omnivores, but he could not even imagine such a thing. The girl couldn't stand still anymore and started running around, so she asked the elves to give or at least water. But suddenly a huge lake immediately appeared near her, in which she could quench her thirst, for all the water in it was fresh. Iriella started running there with her last strength to get rid of the pain somehow. The lake itself didn't mind welcoming her anymore, so it started to form big waves. And so very quickly the girl ran up to the right place, and immediately fell into the water to drink and quench the thirst and burning that she had formed after the plant. Still the question continued to plague her, why hadn't the saint informed her that it was going to be so bad? Meanwhile the weather was really beautiful, the sun was shining and the birds were starting to sing, nothing boded ill. After quenching her thirst the girl collapsed exhausted on the grass, in order to at least get some rest after what she had experienced. She was starting to have some not-so-good thoughts. Suggestions had already entered her head more than once about just giving up and leaving all of this. She lay there looking up at the sky, trying to find the answer to her questions there. Closing her eyes, Iriella began to worry very much. Was this really what she was capable of? She was convinced that everything was happening to her by God's will, so she had to be patient. After these words a shadow covered her head and a familiar silhouette approached her, who in a pleasant voice told the saint to rise and go with him. It was Ray, who had returned from his home and suggested that she get ready, in order to travel to the Holy Realm soon. He still continued to look at her and asked that the girl begin to pack and prepare to go with him to the Holy Realm. Iriella looked at him and really couldn't even believe her eyes. Could it be that she could see him and the guy was now talking to her completely seriously and not joking? But Ray still wasn't ready to forgive Iriella, so he continued to talk rudely to her. He ordered her to get up and go to the Holy Realm, but she still didn't understand if that meant that the guy had finally forgiven her. He smiled and said that of course it wasn't, but she hadn't even practically counted on it. Ray told her to get ready, while he went to the village to say goodbye to his friends. The elfess greeted him. It might have looked like it was FIA, but no, it wasn't, so it was important for him to see her and see how she was doing. And he was very surprised, because she already knew about his coming and was expecting him. Besides, recently the elves reported that FIA had woken up, so it was necessary to see her as soon as possible. They walked up to her cabin together, in which they gave her first aid, trying to heal FIA as soon as possible. The guy was very excited, as he was getting very close to seeing his girlfriend. FIA was really surprised to see him, even though she knew Ray was coming. It was much better visually, and she looked really pretty, you'd have to agree. Ray was a little embarrassed even, but he still picked up on the fact that it was really nice to see her here, because she was finally waking up. He approached her and wanted to ask her how she was feeling. She talked to him nicely and was very happy about the question and his visit. Ira was also standing behind her and was very happy that the guy had gotten back so quickly, and also noted that she was very happy that FIA had recovered so quickly and was already feeling much better. Ray didn't even notice her right away, so he asked her if she really cared about her friend that much, being here all the time. But she exhaled and said that for a high elf, caring for her people was a common thing. Suddenly the keeper was very frightened and began to grab her blanket, for she had just been struck by her abuser, which she obviously could not have expected, but Iriella asked her not to move, for her wounds had not yet fully recovered. Ray was already standing with his backpack, which was immediately noticed by everyone around him. His girlfriend got really excited, because he's finally got his head around it, and it seems like he's ready to move on. Ray smiled and said that he planned to go to the Holy Kingdom as he had been told, for it was indeed foolish to miss such an opportunity. Ira got a little embarrassed and let him know that she was really happy to hear that, even though she realized that he would be leaving very soon. FIA started screaming at this and tried to get out of bed abruptly. She clearly didn't expect to hear such a thing, but she remembered that Ira was near her, so she quickly calmed down and apologized to her, because she didn't want to behave like that, especially in her presence. But Ira was not embarrassed by this behavior at all. Ray also smiled, then began to parody the girl, saying if there were any questions or points of interest, she could safely ask them. Ira was very much surprised by such a thing and got a little angry, for was he really parodying her, for how dare he drive himself in such a manner? So Ray immediately apologized for such behavior. His girlfriend was looking at him, trying to find out if he was really leaving. So he hadn't planned to stay here, with them. FIA Ira's words really hurt a lot. She really didn't understand how he could do such a thing. Would he really go with those people from the Holy Kingdom? Ray also thought about it, not that he had decided to do this because of their arrival here, but he had considered going there much earlier. Did he really plan to leave them for a long time? He didn't know the answer to that question himself, so he said that he would probably only be there for a few years. His girlfriend didn't even know what to say. It was obvious that she wasn't ready to accept this reality, just like his parents. Then she smiled, and informed him that it really wasn't that much, so she wished him good luck and told him to have a good trip and rest, and to promise her that he would definitely come back. He started grabbing the back of his head and talking about how elves have a slightly different perception of time. Ira also asked if they had finished their conversation. If so, she would like to have a private conversation with him as well. Ray looked at his friend one more time and said goodbye to her, telling her that they would definitely see each other soon. They went outside and were already approaching the house that Ira already lived in. She came closer to him and told him she wanted to give him something, but asked the guy not to refuse the gift under any circumstances. Ray was very surprised, because he really likes surprises like this, so he wondered what she was offering him. The girl asked, holding out her hand, after which she grabbed it. Ira squeezed her very tightly and informed her she was passing a piece of herself to him. It would serve as proof that she was always by his side. Suddenly, his hand began to glow, everything began to transform, and the process of transferring magical power began. Ray didn't realize what was happening to his hand, but it felt really good. On it seems to have begun to form the very real seal that belongs to the elves, which has magical properties. His friend began to smile and informed him that he could now turn to her when he needed help. It was obvious that the process of transferring the magic had a very strong effect on the guy's condition, because he was really starting to lose consciousness a bit. But after a minute he came to his senses and he was already feeling much better. He started to panic, because he remembered that elves used to take people as slaves, so maybe Ira had enslaved him right now, so he really started to panic about it, because would he be enslaved until his death? She calmed him down and told him that she didn't know exactly what he was up to, but it wasn't it. It was just a piece of her seal, so don't worry about it. It is a seal created by her magic, and she has asked that it be considered a gift in the form of hers, meaning she is now willing to obey it. She smiled and said that she would always be there for him now, so if he needed any help, for him not to be shy and turn to her, let him remember that and be careful. Ray looked at his hand that was enchanted with the seal and was very much pleased. He was tied very pleasant and unaccustomed. The guy deep down was very happy, but was still afraid to convey that emotion yet. But he could not resist for long, and after a while he smiled and was very happy with such a gift. It was already getting dark outside again and deep night was approaching. The villagers were beginning to get ready to go to bed again. Iriella was also watching the whole situation and was very pleased with this outcome. She quietly followed the guy and smiled the whole time. She was tensely pleased that he was walking along with her. He thought this tide very strange, so he turned to her and asked if she was really that happy, because he had never seen such strong emotions before. Of course, shouldn't she be happy that she would soon return to God? But Ray rolled his eyes and realized that it seemed that these days away from the temple were really hard on Iriella, and she looked at him and said they should go as fast as they could before it was night yet. Ray looked at the village once more and was indeed very upset, for these villagers had really given him a lot. The sun was already setting over the horizon and the land was preparing for midnight. Ray continued to watch the sunset and admire these beautiful surroundings. Iriella walked up to him and asked if he regretted the decision. But Ray was indeed a little upset, for he realized that he would still be able to come back here anyway, but something was nagging him. He looked at the girl, and wanted to check with her again, would all those conditions he had spoken of really be fulfilled. But the girl smiled, and then said that about the first one still needs some thought and discussion, but the rest, she will do. This made Ray very angry and she could see that he really didn't trust her and didn't want to accept her. Maybe it wasn't too late to go back. But the decision had already been made, whereupon he threw on his bag, and ordered the girl to go as soon as possible, which she was very much pleased to do. They walked together and realized that they had a very long way to go indeed. Their road also passed the large house where Ray was born and spent his entire childhood. While they were walking, the guy decided to look at the map to make sure they were going in the right direction. Besides, Iriella had changed the place they would need to visit before going to the Holy Kingdom, so they needed to explore it as soon as possible. But to begin with, they will need to go on a royal journey. That this is still a mystery, but the girl was very much surprised. All the matter is that the accompanying squad is in the royal capital called Cilia, so they need to first meet with them, and only then they will be able to direct the Holy Kingdom. It would be good to continue on the path to begin with, but Ray still didn't understand why Iriella was so agitated. The thing is, it takes about 3 days to get to the royal capital, but using mana, you can get there much faster, in about 1 day, right? Need to relax a bit since he'd have to run all day. This procedure really surprised the girl, so she didn't hold back and asked what the saint was doing now. She smiled and was very much surprised at the same time, for was he really going to run all the way? Ray was also a little shocked, but still tried to convince the girl that it was faster that way, wasn't it? Iriella was very surprised at this suggestion, because even her divine power had been corrected, and Uri didn't have divine power yet, so he wouldn't be able to pull this off in any way. He thought about it for a moment and said that it would probably be much faster to get there with his mana flows than on a horse, but why do it? After all, the girl had even bought a horse to make it much more comfortable for them to get around, but he couldn't ignore that. So Ray exhaled and smiled, for now he wouldn't have to waste his strength. Iriella said she only bought one horse to save money for emergencies, no big deal. She was very worried about whether the guy would mind, but unfortunately he doesn't know how to ride horses anyway. So they sat down together and started driving in the right direction, where Ray kept hugging the girl to fall. Their journey was indeed very long because it passed through various mountains and difficult to access areas of land where I without a horse would have been very difficult indeed. After they had traveled quite a bit for the day, it was late at night, so they needed to make a quick stop and spend the night, in order to start moving with renewed vigor the next morning. It didn't take long for the guy to start using his superpowers, which he had already mastered at a fairly young age, so he heated his hand and made it sparkle. Seconds later, a fire had already formed, which began to water all those branches and provide heat. The girl was very surprised by this, because then it is possible that the guy can just activate magic by saying just one word. He is very good for his age, maybe he is a mage of the second circle, but it made her feel really good about it, so he smiled even though he said it was no big deal. Whereupon he decided to make another impression on the girl, and with his index finger he pointed to the pot and filled it with water. After he was done with all that, he started pulling out plants to make something to eat from. Iriella was very much surprised, for she was absolutely convinced that it should not be added there, as she already remembered her bitter experience with this plant. This surprised the guy very much, because why does she refuse this ingredient so much? It is quite tasty, it is only worth a taste, but the girl was very nervous, because she remembers that it is very spicy and bitter. Ray smiled, for did she really eat those leaves, that is, not just the branch itself? He found it very funny, for the girl really did, after which he had to explain to her that people usually only ate the branch, though the leaves contained many more nutrients. The girl was very much surprised at such a thing, for they are indeed too bitter and spicy to eat, but why is all this information he is talking about only now? After the preparation of this dish was over, Ray held it out for her to appreciate how it should ideally be. The flavor would be different many times over. She thanked him and took her portion and already wanted to taste it as soon as possible. After looking at this dish, she concluded that it was indeed very much like a standard soup. She was still scared to eat it, but visually it looked quite appetizing, especially since it had a really nice smell to it. She took a spoon and decided to stir it around a bit. After that she wanted to try it as soon as possible and it surprised her a lot. Iriella was very much shocked at such an ingenious preparation of the dish, laying down accolades that she had made it to the culinary talent shows, for she had never eaten anything tastier before. Ray wondered very much, for why was she eating it so fast? Do they not feed them in the Holy Kingdom? It's certainly a lot scarier than it looks, so the guy recommended eating this dish a little slower, as it can be a major stomachache afterward. The next morning they set out on the road, where they were already greeted by the palace and the beautiful city that was built near it. The market is incredibly large. This is to be expected as this is the royal road, meaning it is exactly the same terrain as the outskirts. And so the boys had already arrived at the castle, where their escorts were surely already waiting for them. Ray looked at the whole environment and wondered very much. He was really enjoying watching it all. After all, it was his first time here, so he was still a little worried and hoped that nothing would happen. And so they had already reached the main entrance to the castle, where two butlers were waiting for them to open the gates. They greeted the girl, and were glad she had come. The butlers were only so friendly to the girl, so they asked her to introduce the young man who sat on the back of the horse. Iriella smiled and reported that he was also indeed a saint, but she felt a little awkward and funny, so she decided to clarify his holiness with the guy himself. He was a little perplexed, but still said himself that he was a saint and his name was Ray. The butlers immediately apologized for such a stupid question and of course let them pass on. The guys walked into this palace and were really quite shocked by such luxury. The priests were already at the entrance and bent their heads in respect, welcoming the saint and the holy man to the castle, for they had come such a long way. The girl reported that she had finished her mission that Cilia had given her and they intended to leave this castle tomorrow, so she ordered them to contact her country and notify them of their return. The priests obeyed her and said they would inform the Light Kingdom of their arrival. At this point, the girl smiled and informed the guy that he could now go and get some rest, for this she would guide him to a resting place. And so they opened the doors, which were much cooler than the very elf village. His room was like a very real palace, though yes, you are right, it is indeed a real palace. Ray was very much shocked, because this is really a real luxury. He could not even imagine to be in such a place, because his previous life he did not have the opportunity to even visit such apartments, all because he was constantly busy. Iriella approached him to ask if he liked everything. Well, the answer, as you can imagine, was as obvious as possible. "You should get some rest, so I will go," Iriella said, and then Rei was a little puzzled, for they were to go to the Holy Kingdom tomorrow morning and would not stay long, would they? But she left the question unanswered and only said that they would see each other tomorrow morning. The guy was very much alarmed by this, for was she really up to something? He stood there puzzled and really trying to figure out what had just happened. Maybe she wanted to set him up somehow or do something unpleasant to him. But there wasn't much time for negative thoughts, as he was really already tired, so he decided to sit down on his bed and change into his pajamas. Rei lay down and decided to relax, for tomorrow he would indeed be traveling to the Holy Realm. He closed his eyes and began to daydream a little, for tomorrow he would have to live there, but he still wondered if his living conditions would be much different. The next day morning came and it was time to get ready for a new day. Rei changed his clothes and immediately afterward he heard banging on his door, which should have woken him up, but he was already awake. Iriella went over to him and asked if Rei was really awake already, but he was still having trouble opening his eyes and also wanted to sleep some more, but still self-informed to move on as quickly as possible. The girl smiled, for if the guy was ready too, it was time to move out. She was very happy and dressed very differently, although the new image also suited her very well. Perhaps she wanted to make a good impression on the guy and please him with her beauty. But he didn't care. He wasn't even listening to what she was telling him and was constantly thinking about his own, so he didn't even pay attention to it. But it didn't last long. He still had to tense up as he didn't fully understand where they were starting to go. Was it really to the king? Her eyes began to shine like diamonds. Iriella couldn't get excited about the future event, for very soon they would see the most important person on the continent. Rei looked at his room and didn't understand why it was necessary to do this, since they usually warned about this kind of thing in advance, at least before going to bed. But Iriella reassured him and informed him that everything would go well, they would just say hello and go, informing him of his departure. Rei grabbed his head and tried to explain to her that it wasn't the main thing right now. If he knew he was going to meet the king he would at least learn some manners. The girl continued to smile and informed him that she purposely didn't want to do it because she was worried that it might disturb his sleep. That wasn't a problem, right? He was already uncomfortable watching all this, as such suspicious courtesy on her part was already beginning to arouse a great deal of suspicion indeed and was starting to get tiresome. The doors opened and the butlers greeted the boys once again. Rei was a little embarrassed, for the conversation immediately began with a discussion of his new position, where the king began to wonder if he was really the newly elected saint. He was still quite young for a king of Cilia, but he was still very strong, though not quite wise, and his name was Theogard.